Before we drift away, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more calming sleep stories. Sweet dreams await. The rain began as a soft patter, barely more than a gentle tapping against the dense canopy above. But as the night deepened, the forest grew restless, and the rain turned into a steady drum roll, filling the silence with its unrelenting rhythm. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine, and the towering trees loomed like silent sentinels in the darkness. In the distance, the flicker of a campfire could be seen, its warm glow casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. The flames crackled, sending tiny embers into the damp air. It was a small, secluded lodge nestled deep within the heart of the forest, far away from the comforts of the modern world. Inside the lodge, the warmth from the fire was a welcome contrast to the cold, wet night outside. The flickering flames painted the walls in orange hues, giving the space a cozy yet eerie feel. The only sounds within were the crackling of the fire and the occasional gust of wind rattling the windows. But outside things felt different. The wind carried whispers, like voices speaking in an unknown language, rising and falling with the storm. You weren't alone. The others had gathered here, seeking shelter from the storm, but there was something unsettling about the way the shadows shifted just beyond the fire's reach. Every now and then, you would hear a twig snap in the distance or a branch groan under the weight of the wind. It was as though the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting. The campfire cast long, flickering shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. A chill ran down your spine as you glanced out the window once more, but this time, you weren't sure if it was the wind or something else you saw moving in the trees. The storm outside intensified as the night wore on, the wind now howling through the trees with a ferocity that made the cabin walls creak. You sat by the fire, your eyes flicking between the warmth of the flames and the growing darkness outside. The rain pounded relentlessly against the roof, and the once inviting crackling of the fire now seemed to take on an ominous tone, as if it were trying to warn you of something. A strange unease settled over the group. No one spoke, but you could feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. The fire's glow flickered in rhythmic pulses, casting brief moments of sharp light that only made the shadows seem deeper. The others were scattered around the room, each of them trying to find comfort in their own way. Some stared at the flames, lost in thought, while others nervously glanced toward the windows as though waiting for something, or someone, to appear. But no one dared venture outside. It was hard to tell how long you had been sitting there, the minutes stretching into what felt like hours. The fire burned steadily, but the temperature inside seemed to drop with every gust of wind that rattled the walls. A soft shiver crept down your spine as a low, almost imperceptible sound reached your ears, cutting through the roar of the storm. It was a whisper. At first, you thought it was just the wind playing tricks on you, but the sound persisted, rising above the storm. A voice, faint but distinct, as though someone, something, was speaking just beyond the edge of the forest. "Did you hear that?" one of the others finally asked, his voice shaky, barely above a whisper. You turned to him, but his eyes were wide, fixed on the window, where the darkness outside seemed to press closer with every passing second. The whisper came again, clearer this time, and it wasn't just one voice. It was a chorus, low and murmuring in an unintelligible language that felt ancient, foreign. The fire flickered violently, casting eerie shapes along the walls, as if the shadows themselves were listening to the voices, reacting to them. "Something's out there," another person muttered, their face pale in the dim light. The tension in the room thickened. No one moved for a long moment. The rain battered the windows, the wind screamed outside, but inside, there was only the sound of the fire crackling and the distant, unnerving whispers. The walls felt like they were closing in. You leaned forward, your heart racing, trying to catch every fragment of sound, but the whispers faded as quickly as they came, leaving only the wind to fill the silence. It wasn't enough to dismiss it as the wind. No, there was something more out there, something you couldn't explain. And as the night stretched on, the whispers began to take shape, growing clearer and more insistent, like they were circling the cabin, drawing closer. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the whispering stopped. A strange, heavy silence followed. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the fire seemed to dim, as though it too was wary of whatever lingered just outside the cabin. You tried to swallow the lump in your throat, but it was hard to shake the sense that something, or someone, was out there watching. The wind outside howled louder, pushing against the trees with a terrifying force, but the whispering had stopped, leaving behind only an unsettling quiet. The tension in the room was palpable. Every tiny sound seemed magnified, the crackling of the fire, the rain against the windows, the occasional creak of the floorboards underfoot. But there was something else, something that had shifted, something that made you feel as though every inch of the darkened forest beyond the windows was now alive with unseen eyes. You glanced around the room. Each of the others seemed equally on edge, their gazes flickering nervously between the windows, the fire, and the door leading out into the dark. No one dared to speak, as if acknowledging the presence of whatever lurked outside would make it real. The longer the silence stretched, the more unbearable it became. You couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving just beyond the trees, something that knew you were here. Suddenly, one of the others, Mark, a tall man with a gruff voice, stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the wooden floor. His face was a mask of both determination and fear, as if he had made a decision, a plan to confront whatever was out there. He walked toward the door, his boots heavy against the floor with each step. "Mark, no," someone called out, but their voice was barely a whisper, drowned out by the storm. Mark paused, his hand on the door handle. He didn't turn to look at anyone, but you could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the door so tightly it was as if he feared it would slip from his grasp. "I'll just take a look," he muttered under his breath. "Make sure everything's all right out there." But even as the words left his lips, you knew it was a mistake. The forest wasn't just a place of trees and silence, it was something older, something that should not be disturbed. The air around you felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to unfold. With one final glance at the group, Mark opened the door and stepped into the night. The moment the door shut behind him, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The warmth from the fire seemed to recede, and a deep, gnawing cold seeped into the air. The whispers had returned, but this time they weren't distant. They were closer, almost too close. You could hear them clearly now, a soft, murmuring hiss that crawled up your spine. It was as though they were circling the room, 1,000 voices, none of them human, none of them friendly. Each word seemed to drip with malice, a language that sent a shiver through your entire body. The forest outside was alive with it, and it was impossible to ignore the fact that something was watching. Mark had been gone too long. Then came the sound you'd been dreading, the unmistakable crack of a twig snapping, sharp and clear in the otherwise oppressive silence. It came from the forest, but it was followed by another, and the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush. The door creaked. Everyone turned in unison, a collective breath held in the dark, the weight of the moment pressing down on each of you. But it wasn't Mark who stepped through the door. It was something else. Tall and twisted, its form barely visible against the storm-soaked night, the thing in the doorway was not quite human. Its shape was long, distorted, and covered in dark, slick shadows that flickered unnaturally. Its eyes, two pale orbs that gleamed like dying embers, locked onto yours. And for a moment, just a moment, everything in the room froze. The air grew colder still, and the fire flickered in a wild frenzy, casting shadows that seemed to reach out toward the figure. The creature didn't speak, but its presence was enough to fill the room with a terror so deep it felt like the walls themselves were closing in. The whispers outside were now a roar, echoing against the walls of the cabin. They grew louder, frantic, as though the forest itself was alive, pressing in on you from all sides. You could see Mark now, just behind the creature, standing motionless, his face drained of color, his eyes wide and unblinking. But there was something off about him, something wrong, something hollow in the way he stood. The creature made no move to enter the room. It only stared as if waiting for something or someone. And then, in a voice that echoed not through the air, but through your very mind, the words came. "You are not welcome here." The whisper slid into your thoughts like ice water, freezing every thought, every impulse. And in that moment you knew. You weren't alone in this forest. You had never been alone. The creature didn't move, but its eyes, those pale, cold orbs, seemed to grow brighter with every passing second. They burned with an intensity that made your skin crawl, as though they were not just seeing you, but peeling back the layers of your very soul. The air in the cabin had thickened, pressing in on you from all sides, as though the very walls had begun to pulse with a malevolent energy. Mark still stood behind the creature, his body rigid, his eyes fixed in a hollow stare. There was no sign of recognition in his expression, no sign of life at all. His mouth hung slightly ajar, his lips dry and cracked, but there was nothing behind his eyes, only the endless void of the forest that had claimed him. It was as if whatever stood before you had drained him of everything that made him human. "Mark!" Someone cried out from the corner of the room, their voice trembling. But Mark didn't respond. His eyes remained locked on nothing at all, as though whatever held him captive had silenced his very will. The creature tilted its head slightly, the motion fluid and unnerving, like a snake preparing to strike. It stepped forward just a fraction, and the room seemed to shrink with its approach. The fire crackled wildly, sending sparks into the air, but they seemed to vanish before they could even reach the ceiling, as though the warmth of the flames was being absorbed by the creature itself. It was then that you noticed something else, something far more unsettling than its appearance. The whispers had intensified. They were no longer distant echoes but screamed through your mind, a cacophony of tortured voices that sounded like they were coming from all around, from within the walls, from beneath the floorboards, from inside your own head. They were screaming, pleading, demanding, asterisk, leave. Leave before it takes you too. Asterisk. The words were sharp, jagged, like the crack of a whip. And they weren't just a warning, they were a command. The voices were urging you to run, to flee, to escape before the creature could close its jaws around you. But where would you go? The forest outside was no longer a sanctuary, it was a prison. And the very air was thick with something ancient and hungry. One of the others, a woman named Clara, stumbled back from the fireplace, her eyes wide with terror. What is it? What the hell is that thing? She whispered, her voice shaking so violently it was almost inaudible over the sound of the rain pounding against the windows. The creature's head snapped toward her, its gaze shifting with an unnatural speed. It didn't make a sound, but its eyes burned brighter for a split second, and for the briefest moment, Clara's face contorted in terror, her pupils dilating as though caught in some unseen force. And then, without warning, she collapsed to the floor. Clara, another person shouted, rushing to her side. But Clara didn't respond. She lay still, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling, her breath shallow. Whatever had claimed Mark had now claimed Clara too. The creature didn't seem to care about them, though. It didn't even acknowledge their presence as it slowly turned back toward you. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The fire crackled weakly, the embers dimming as if drained by the very atmosphere in the room. And then, in a voice that made your bones ache, it spoke again. You do not belong here. The words were slow, deliberate, and filled with a deep, unrelenting malice. The air grew even colder, if that was even possible, and the temperature dropped to a point where you could see your breath hanging in the air. The fire, once a comforting glow, now felt distant, foreign. It felt as if the creature itself was drawing every ounce of warmth from the room, leaving you and the others cold and exposed. It wasn't just a matter of physical warmth, it was something more profound, something that chilled you from the inside out, leaving you numb and weak. As the creature's gaze lingered on you, you could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on you, suffocating you in its silent scrutiny. Its eyes were filled with ancient knowledge, an understanding of something far older than the forest itself, something that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, and had never once been moved by the passage of time. But in those eyes there was no pity, no compassion, only an endless, unwavering hunger. The whispers in your mind grew louder again. You could hear them as clearly as the sound of your own heartbeat, thundering in your ears. The voices were no longer pleading for you to leave. They were now begging you for something else, something darker. Join us in the dark. The forest calls for you. The words wrapped around you like chains, pulling you closer to the edge of madness. You could feel your legs trembling, your breath catching in your throat as the shadows in the room seemed to stretch longer, reaching toward you. It was as though the forest itself was alive, creeping into every corner, seeping through the cracks in the walls, in the floor, in the very air you breathed. You couldn't escape. The creature took a step forward, its shadow growing larger as it approached. Its eyes never left yours. You could hear the others shuffling behind you, but there was nothing they could do. No one could move. The fire had all but died out, leaving only the faintest glow in the hearth, and it was now that you realized the creature wasn't afraid of the fire. It wasn't afraid of anything. It was the forest that had power here. It was the forest that controlled everything. And you were nothing more than a fleeting presence, something to be consumed. The door to the cabin slammed shut, and the wind howled louder than ever. You were trapped. The creature's presence loomed over you, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Its eyes were like twin burning holes in the night, cold and unyielding, each gaze a silent, oppressive weight that threatened to collapse the very walls of the cabin. The whispers swirled, an endless chorus of voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. They rose and fell in a rhythm that was both maddening and hypnotic, a constant, gnawing hum in the back of your mind. The fire had nearly died, its glow nothing more than a dying ember. It was as though the warmth of the room had been stolen by the creature, leaving only the bitter chill of the forest outside. You could feel the cold creeping into your bones, a slow, insidious thing that left you numb, that threatened to turn you to ice if you stood still for too long. Your breath was shallow, erratic as you took a slow step back, your mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. The others were just as paralyzed, their faces pale with terror, eyes wide and unblinking. The cabin felt too small, too fragile, and for the first time, you realized it wasn't just the storm outside that was closing in on you, it was something much older, something far more dangerous. The creature stepped forward again, its movements fluid, its body a shifting mass of shadows and darkness. Its form seemed to twist and warp with each step, as though the laws of nature itself bent around it, reshaping the very air in its wake. It didn't speak, but its presence was enough to send waves of terror crashing through your chest. It was then that you noticed the other figures behind it, tall, silent shapes that had been standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of the firelight. They had been there all along, hidden in the dark, watching the cabin with eyes that glowed faintly, like distant stars. They were not human, not even close. Their bodies were elongated, skeletal, their skin stretched tight over bones that seemed to shimmer with an unnatural sheen. They were nothing more than shadows, their forms barely discernible in the flickering light, but there was something unmistakably menacing about them. One of the figures stepped forward, its movements jerky as though it was struggling to maintain its shape, but the creature at the door didn't react. It simply stood there, unmoving, as though it was waiting for something, waiting for you. Your heart raced, pounding in your chest as you tried to make sense of the situation. But the more you thought, the more your mind seemed to twist in knots, as if the very fabric of your thoughts was unraveling. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were deafening. Join us. It wasn't just one voice now, it was 1,000, a cacophony of sounds that rose and fell, pleading, demanding. Join us in the dark. You clutched your head, trying to block out the sound, but it was impossible. The whispers wormed their way into every thought, every nerve. They were inside you, swirling around in your mind like insects, filling every corner of your consciousness with their dark promises. Please, you gasped, your voice trembling. What do you want? The creature's eyes glowed brighter, its form seeming to pulse with the energy of the storm outside. It didn't answer you directly. Instead, the whispering grew louder, more frantic, until it became almost a roar. Join us. The shadows around the room seemed to shift, stretching toward you, their long fingers brushing the floor. The very air seemed to thicken, filling with an oppressive weight that made it harder to breathe. You could feel the presence of the figures in the darkness, feel the cold touch of their empty eyes on your skin, as if they were reaching out, beckoning you into the fold. The others were still frozen in place, unable to move, as though paralyzed by the same unseen force that held you in its grip. You could see the terror in their eyes, the raw fear that clung to them like a second skin, and yet none of them dared to move, to speak, to do anything that might break the silence of this nightmare. Mark's hollow eyes locked onto yours from where he stood, still standing like a puppet under the creature's control. His lips trembled, but no sound escaped his mouth. His body was a lifeless shell, but there was something in the way his eyes flickered that made your heart tighten in your chest. Suddenly, the figure in the doorway shifted. Its shape bent unnaturally, its arms extending as it reached out toward you, its hand long and spindly, like a twisted branch from the forest. The temperature dropped again, the air turning to ice, and the whispers rose to a fever pitch, each one urging you closer. You wanted to run. You wanted to scream, to break free of the paralyzing terror that held you in place. But your legs felt like lead, your body refusing to obey, frozen in place as the figure came closer, its presence overwhelming. Leave this place now, you heard yourself whisper, but the words felt weak, distant, lost in the roaring sea of whispers. The words didn't matter. Nothing mattered. Not anymore. You were no longer in control. With one swift movement, the creature lunged forward. Its hand brushed your arm, cold as death itself, and the contact sent a shock through your body, a violent, electric tremor that left you breathless. The room seemed to spin, the shadows growing larger, the whispers turning into a deafening scream. You could feel the very walls of the cabin pressing in on you, suffocating you with their weight. But then, in the middle of the chaos, something shifted. A flash of movement, barely noticeable, but there nonetheless. You blinked, and for a split second, the figure in the doorway flickered, its shape warping before your eyes. The shadows that clung to it seemed to dissipate, revealing something else beneath, something even darker. A low, guttural growl filled the air. It came from deep within the forest, an inhuman sound that rattled the walls of the cabin. The creature's eyes flickered as it turned toward the door, and in that moment of distraction, the air around you began to change again. The whispers faltered as though even they were afraid. The growl from the forest rumbled through the cabin, a low, guttural sound that reverberated in the pit of your stomach, as if it was not a noise meant for human ears. It was primal, ancient, and it sent a ripple of fear through the room. The creature, its glowing eyes still fixed on you, turned sharply, its form twitching in a strange, erratic motion as though it could sense something far more powerful approaching. The shadows that had clung to its form began to shift in strange, erratic patterns, as though they had a will of their own, moving in chaotic swirls around the creature. It made no sound, but its presence was palpable, pressing against you like a heavy, suffocating weight. The whispers, which had been relentless and maddening moments ago, now quieted to an unsettling silence, as if even the voices were holding their breath. And then you saw it, something deeper, something beyond the edge of the forest. The night outside seemed to shift. The rain, though still pouring, suddenly appeared to fall at odd angles, as if caught in an unseen wind. The trees beyond the cabin began to sway unnaturally, not just from the storm, but from something far more deliberate. The darkness seemed to fold inward, an unnatural movement that pulled at the edges of reality itself. It wasn't just the creature at the door. It was something more, something far worse, something that didn't belong to this world. The whispers came again, but this time they were no longer directed at you. They were speaking to it, to the creature in the doorway. They were pleading, begging, return before it consumes you. The words were soft, almost sorrowful, and you could sense the desperation behind them. The figure at the door did not react, its eyes still glowing, still locked on you, as though it could not hear the warnings, as though it had already made its choice. The growl outside came again, this time louder, closer. You could feel it in your bones, a vibration that seemed to sink deep into the earth beneath the cabin, rattling the very foundation of the lodge. The windows shuddered in their frames, and the door to the outside groaned, as if it might give way to whatever was out there. Suddenly, the creature's eyes flickered, just for a moment, before they snapped back to you, now filled with a sense of urgency. It moved, but not in the way you expected. The shadows around it expanded, warping and twisting in unnatural patterns. The very air around it seemed to distort, bending like the heat of a summer day over pavement. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Without warning, the door swung open, pushed by an unseen force. The wind from outside surged in, cold and bitter, extinguishing what little warmth had been left in the room. The fire in the hearth sputtered, its last embers fighting the sudden, brutal cold, but they were no match for the forces that had gathered. You could hear it now, the thing outside. The growl was no longer distant, no longer a distant rumble, but a tangible sound that filled the entire forest, shaking the very trees with its fury. It was something large, something ancient, something that had been waiting patiently for an age for this very moment. The creature in the doorway hesitated, its form still wrapped in shifting darkness, and in that instant you saw it. A silhouette, massive and twisted, barely visible through the rain and the shadows, but unmistakable in its size and shape. It was not human. It was not even something that could belong to this world. The forest had always been alive, but this thing, this entity, it was something other. Its limbs were long, impossibly long, its body a writhing mass of shadows and tendrils that seemed to move of their own accord, stretching and twisting like a living nightmare. Its eyes, 3 of them, glowed like smoldering embers, their light cutting through the darkness like a knife. And as it took a step forward, the ground trembled beneath it. The creature at the door, the one that had been tormenting you since your arrival, stiffened. You could see its body tense, its arms reaching for the air as if it could hold the very essence of the storm at bay, but it was too late. The thing in the forest stepped closer, each movement sending another shockwave of terror through your body. It wasn't just the size of it, the pure, raw power radiating from it, but the feeling. The sense that this creature, this force, was a harbinger of something far worse. It was the forest, but it was something more. It was the soul of the forest, the ancient being that existed long before the trees, the rocks, and the rivers. And now it was awake. It had been roused, and it was coming for you. The creature in the doorway shifted once more, but this time it was not moving with purpose. It was retreating, pulling back into the shadows, away from the threat of whatever that thing was. The air seemed to hum with an unnatural tension as the two beings, forces really, locked eyes across the threshold of the door. The whispers came again, louder now, more urgent, but they were not directed at you. They were pleading with the creature in the doorway. Leave, it will consume us all. But the creature didn't listen. It stepped back further into the shadows, the door slamming shut behind it with a finality that echoed in the depths of your chest. Outside, the growl grew louder, almost deafening. And then, the sound of something cracking. Not the sound of wood breaking, but something far deeper, far older. It was the sound of reality itself bending, as if the fabric of the world was tearing at the seams. The shadows at the door stretched into the cabin, and the whispers filled your head, pressing against your skull, urging you to flee. Go. Now. You had no choice. You had to move. The door was still wide open, and though you could hear the creature outside drawing closer, you knew that if you stayed here, if you waited any longer, it would be too late. The forest was alive. The forest was waiting, and it was no longer the safe place you thought it was. The door loomed open before you, the rain pouring in like a relentless torrent. The cold wind howled through the cabin, pulling the last remnants of warmth from the hearth, leaving the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched like creeping fingers, and the whispers, once distant and fragmented, now filled your mind entirely. Go, they urged again, their voices low and jagged. Before it is too late. Your heart raced, a heavy weight pressing down on your chest. You could feel the presence of the creature outside, that colossal force moving closer, each step it took shaking the very earth beneath you. The growl that had begun as a distant echo was now a constant vibration in your bones, reverberating in your skull, and in the deepest parts of your mind, you could hear the call, the ancient pull of the forest that beckoned you forward toward the waiting darkness. With a sudden, overwhelming clarity, you knew there was no escaping it, not from the forest, not from whatever this place had become. The whispers had started, yes, as a plea, a warning. But now they were urging you toward something deeper, something older than any creature you had seen in the last few hours. You turned toward the open door, heart pounding, your breath shallow. The figure in the doorway, the creature that had watched you with those soulless, burning eyes, was gone, but the terror it had left behind was still present, like a shadow hanging in the room. You could feel it in the air, thick and heavy, as though every inch of the cabin had been marked, branded by its presence. And then you saw it, the thing in the forest, its massive form barely discernible through the sheets of rain. It was monstrous, impossibly large, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it had all the time in the world. Its eyes, those 3 burning embers, glowed with an intensity that made the rain itself seem pale in comparison. It didn't need to move quickly. Its very presence was enough to push you back, to root you in place. Your legs refused to obey you, the weight of its gaze pressing down on you like a physical force. You could hear the branches groaning under the pressure of its massive limbs, hear the earth itself quaking with every step. Go, the whispers urged once more. It will not wait forever. Your eyes darted to the others in the room. Clara, still unconscious, her face pale and unseeing. Mark, standing motionless, his eyes hollow, his mind lost to whatever dark force had taken hold of him. They were no help. They couldn't be. They were caught in their own traps, each of them bound by the forest's call, lost in its twisted embrace. But you still had a choice. With a deep breath, you stepped toward the door. The wind screamed in your ears, the shadows seemed to stretch further, darker, and you could feel the oppressive weight of the forest closing in on you. The growl of the creature outside was closer now, nearly deafening, and the very air around you felt heavy, thick with something ancient and malevolent. You glanced back once more, but as you did, the whispers turned darker, more frantic. Leave now, or it will come for you too. Without thinking, you stepped into the night. The cold hit you like a physical blow, the air sharp and bitter, biting at your skin. The rain was a sheet of freezing water that soaked you to the bone within seconds. You could barely see through the downpour, but you didn't need to. You could feel it, feel the forest stretching around you, its ancient pulse throbbing beneath your feet. The trees loomed like giants, their branches twisted and gnarled, their roots creeping along the ground like tendrils, reaching for you. It was as though the forest was alive, alive in a way that was far beyond the simple life of plants and animals. This place was something more, something older, something that had been waiting. You moved quickly, your boots slipping in the slick mud beneath you, the rain blurring your vision. The growl of the creature was louder now, impossibly close, and you could feel its presence at the edge of the trees, pushing forward with a relentless, terrifying force. It was closing in, but you couldn't stop. There was no turning back now. The forest was alive with sound, more than just the storm, more than the howling wind. It was as though the trees themselves were whispering to you, urging you forward. You could hear the cracking of branches, the rustling of leaves, but beneath it all, the low hum of something ancient, something primal, pulsed through the air. You could feel it in your bones, vibrating beneath the very earth. And then, through the rain and the darkness, you saw it. A flicker of light, distant but unmistakable. A faint orange glow, like a flame, hidden among the trees. The campfire. It should have been a relief, but something in the back of your mind told you it wasn't. It was too still, too quiet. The flames didn't flicker the way they should in the storm. There was no crackle of wood, no warmth in the air. It was as though the fire was waiting for you. The whispers grew louder again, swirling in your mind. They were no longer pleading, no longer urgent. Now they were welcoming you, coaxing you toward the light, toward the center of the forest. Come, they whispered. Come closer. Come into the heart of the forest. You could feel the air grow colder still as you drew closer to the fire. It was a strange, unnatural cold, like the chill of death itself. And as you neared, you could hear something else, a low, rhythmic sound like chanting. It wasn't human, not even close, and it sent a cold shiver up your spine. The fire was now in front of you, casting long, twisted shadows against the trees. The flames were a sickly green, flickering with an unnatural intensity. But the fire wasn't the source of the chanting. It was coming from deeper in the woods. A figure stood there, just beyond the firelight, barely visible through the mist and the rain. It was cloaked in shadows, its form indistinct but towering, and it was watching you with eyes that burned like coals. The chanting grew louder. You didn't need to ask who it was. You already knew. The chanting continued, rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern that seemed to echo off the trees and reverberate through your bones. It was ancient, primal, like the earth itself was speaking in a language that had been lost to time, deep, guttural, and filled with a longing that felt like it could swallow you whole. The figure just beyond the firelight moved, a slow, deliberate step forward. Its form was still shrouded in darkness, its outline flickering like a shadow cast by the flames. There was something unnatural about the way it stood, the way it didn't sway with the wind, didn't bend with the rain. It was anchored, solid, as though it was part of the very ground itself. The green fire burned brighter for a moment, casting strange, unnatural shadows that stretched unervingly long. The wind howled louder, but the flames remained steady, undisturbed by the storm. It was as if the elements themselves had no power here. Only the forest, only this place ruled. The figure stepped closer, and you could see its eyes. Two burning orbs, not human, not animal, but something ancient and eternal. They pierced through the darkness, locking onto yours, and in that instant, you felt a wave of cold wash over you, a deep, bone-chilling cold that seeped into your very soul. It wasn't just the cold of the night. No, this was something far worse. This was the cold of the forest itself, the cold of something that had been lying dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to wake. Come closer, the figure whispered, its voice a low hum that seemed to reverberate in your mind. It wasn't a sound that came from its lips. It was inside you, wrapping around your thoughts like a thick fog, pulling at your very essence. The fire behind it flickered, casting warped, grotesque shapes on the trees around you, and the chanting grew louder, more urgent. There were voices now, hundreds of them, rising from the earth, from the air, from the very shadows themselves. They all called to you, beckoning you closer, urging you to join them. Come closer, the figure repeated, its voice an irresistible pull. The shadows around it seemed to shift, swaying in time with the chanting, as though the very forest was alive, watching, waiting. You could feel it now, the heartbeat of the woods, slow, steady, a deep thrum that matched the rhythm of your own pulse. The air around you grew thick with anticipation. The rain had stopped completely, and the wind had ceased its howling. The only sound now was the rhythmic chanting, the voices calling from the darkness, and the pulsing of that strange, ancient energy that filled the very air. You took a tentative step forward, your legs heavy, as though the forest itself was pulling you in. It wasn't just the figure that had drawn you closer. It was everything. The air, the earth, the shadows, the fire. They were all alive with a kind of energy you couldn't begin to comprehend, but you could feel it wrapping around you, coaxing you forward. The figure's eyes burned brighter, and as it moved, the shadows that clung to it seemed to stretch and shift, growing longer and darker. Its form was becoming clearer now, but it was still wrong, still something other. Its body seemed to twist and writhe like smoke, its edges blurring, and yet it was there, solid, unyielding, and pulling you closer. It raised a hand toward you, and as it did, the air around it seemed to crackle with energy. You could feel it like static electricity crawling across your skin. The figure's fingers stretched impossibly long, its shadowy hand outstretched, and you realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't just beckoning you, it was taking you. Join us, it said, its voice both a command and a plea, like the last echo of something lost to time. You are one with the forest now. You are one with the dark. Your heart pounded in your chest, and a primal fear surged through you. This wasn't just a figure standing in the shadows, it was a part of the forest itself, an entity that had been bound to this place long before you had arrived. And it was waiting for you to make your choice. You could feel the pull. The force, the gravity of the forest, the way it wrapped its fingers around your thoughts. tugging you toward it. It was like the deepest part of the earth calling to you, the ancient pulse of something older than the trees, older than time itself. But there was something else, something faint, a voice in the back of your mind, quiet like a whisper through the storm. It was the real you, the one who remembered the warmth of home, the safety of light, the simple joy of living without fear. Fight it, it urged. This isn't you. It was the only thing that kept you rooted to the earth, the only thing that stopped you from walking forward into the waiting darkness. You closed your eyes, taking a deep breath, grounding yourself in the feeling of your feet against the wet soil, the cold rain on your skin. But the figure didn't wait. It was no longer content to simply watch. It lunged forward, its elongated hand reaching for you with impossible speed. The shadows around it seemed to stretch and bend, swallowing the ground beneath it. In that moment, time seemed to slow. The shadows closed in, the chanting grew deafening, and you could feel the pull of the forest in your bones, your very soul. It wanted you. It needed you. You stumbled backward, your legs refusing to obey, but the pull of the figure was too strong, too powerful. You could feel its energy like a storm surge crashing over you. The shadows stretched farther, faster, and the whispers began to meld together, one overwhelming tide of voices. You weren't sure when it happened, but suddenly the ground beneath you cracked open. A deep, rumbling noise filled the air, and from the very earth itself, something rose, something vast, dark, and ancient. The force of it shook the ground, and the trees trembled. The figure in front of you smiled, or perhaps it was just a twisting of its features. Its eyes were brighter now, blinding, as the ground parted beneath you, revealing a chasm in the earth. The voices rose in triumph, and the air crackled with the power of something that had not been seen for eons. It was time. You could feel it in your very being. The forest had claimed its price. The ground trembled beneath you, a deep, ominous rumble that shook your entire body. It wasn't just the forest, it was as if the earth itself was awakening, stretching its limbs beneath the soil, pulling at the roots, the stones, the very foundation of the world. The trees groaned in protest, their branches swaying violently as if caught in some invisible force. The air thickened with a palpable, dark energy, pressing down on you, suffocating you with its weight. Every breath you took felt like it was filtered through the darkness itself, cold and sharp. The fire behind you flickered wildly, casting long, twisted shadows that danced unnaturally on the trees, bending and distorting like some grotesque reflection of reality. The figure's eyes, burning with an unnatural light, pierced through the storm and the shadows, locking onto yours with a gaze that felt like it was unraveling your very being. It was moving now, its form no longer just a shadow, but something more tangible, something that was real. Its long limbs stretched forward, impossibly long, its fingers tipped with sharp, claw-like nails that scraped the air with a sound that made your skin crawl. The chanting, a low, primal sound, intensified. It wasn't just coming from the figure anymore. The forest itself was singing, a song of old magic, of forgotten rites and buried promises, of dark pacts and lost souls. The earth itself seemed to hum with it, and you could feel the ground shifting beneath your feet. And then it happened, the rift in the earth. A deep, guttural crack split the ground in front of you, wide and jagged, like the maw of some ancient beast awakening from a long slumber. It was as if the very fabric of reality itself was being torn open. The air pulsed with the force of it, sending a shockwave that knocked you off your feet. You stumbled backward, your breath catching in your throat as the ground at your feet buckled, cracked, and split. From the rift, a dark, swirling fog began to pour out, thick and choking. It was not the mist of a storm, nor the fog of the morning light. It was something darker, something alive. It writhed and twisted, as though it had a mind of its own, curling around the edges of the rift like fingers reaching for the sky. The air grew colder still, the fog heavy with a sense of dread that gnawed at your mind, making it harder to think, harder to breathe. The figure moved again, its limbs stretching with unnatural speed. It was no longer just a shadow. Its form was becoming more solid, more real, and its eyes burned with an intensity that was almost unbearable. It stepped toward the rift, its dark form melding with the fog as it extended its hand, as if calling to the void below. "It is time," the figure whispered, its voice a low, rumbling echo in your mind. The chanting, now growing louder, seemed to merge with its voice, creating a maddening symphony that twisted through the forest, wrapping around your senses like a vice. The figure's hand hovered over the rift, its fingers brushing the edges of the fog. You could feel the energy radiating from it, raw, ancient, and powerful. The very ground beneath you seemed to shake with the force of it, and you could sense that whatever was about to emerge from the rift would change everything. You tried to move, to run, but your legs felt like lead. The shadows of the forest were closing in, and the whispers, now a cacophony of voices, were too loud to ignore. They screamed in your mind, urging you to join them, to surrender to the forest, to become one with it. Come closer, the figure coaxed, its voice a lure, sweet and poisonous. You belong here. You are part of the forest now. The earth calls for you. A surge of panic flooded through you, but you couldn't shake the pull. It was irresistible. The rift, the creature, the figure, they were all part of something much larger, something that had been waiting, watching, and now it was hungry. The fog swirled and thickened, and you could feel the temperature drop with each passing second. The trees groaned again, their branches creaking as if they were bowing to the force that was rising from the earth. The forest was alive, and it was no longer the kind of living being you had understood. It was a deep, ancient force, full of hunger and darkness, and it was pulling at everything within its reach. The rift widened, and from the depths of it, something began to emerge. It was not a single being. It was a presence, an entity that defied description. It was the very embodiment of the forest, of the land that had been untouched by time, the darkness that had seeped into every living thing. Its form was fluid, shifting in and out of reality, a mass of shadows, tendrils, and glowing eyes that flickered like dying stars. The growl, the one you had heard earlier, rose again, but it wasn't just a sound now. It was felt in every inch of your body, deep within your bones. The growl was the sound of the forest speaking, of the ancient power that had been buried for centuries now stretching its limbs. From the depths of the rift, a hand, if you could even call it that, emerged. It was massive, covered in thick black tendrils that reached out and twisted around the air. The fingers were long, twisted, and sharp, each one ending in a claw-like tip that scraped against the very fabric of the earth. The ground shook as the hand gripped the edge of the rift, pulling itself forward. The air was thick with the scent of decay, of earth and rot, of something that had been buried too long, only to be unearthed now in its terrible, terrifying hunger. And then, from the rift, emerged its face, or what could only be described as a face. It was an endless, shifting mass of eyes, each one glowing with a sickly light, each one gazing at you with a kind of knowing hunger. It wasn't human or anything that could be called alive by any definition you knew. It was something much darker, much older, something not of this world. The whispers reached their crescendo, all of them speaking in one voice now, a single overwhelming command that tore through your mind and soul. Join us. Become one with the dark. Let the forest claim you. The presence reached forward with its tendrils, the shadows curling around you like a noose, pulling you toward the rift. You could feel the very fabric of your being slipping away, as though the force of the forest was eroding everything you had been, everything you were. You were no longer sure where the rift ended and the forest began. The two were blending together, becoming one, and you were at the center of it, pulled into the heart of something that could never be understood. And then, just as the tendrils wrapped around your legs, pulling you closer to the rift, your voice, screamed out, "No!" In that single moment, you broke free from the grip of the shadows, stumbling backward. But the forest was not done with you. It would never be done. The rift began to close, but the forest still whispered, called for you, it needed you. And you knew deep down that no matter how far you ran, no matter where you went, the forest would always be waiting. The rift in the earth had closed, but the sense of foreboding remained. The presence that had risen from the depths of the forest was not gone, only shifting, moving in the unseen places where the trees grew thick and the shadows ran long. Its hunger was still there, an ancient, gnawing need that seemed to pulse through the very roots of the earth. The wind had picked up again, howling through the forest, but it wasn't the wind, it was the forest itself. Its voice carried on the breeze, whispers curling through the leaves, wrapping around you like a suffocating blanket. You stumbled back, your legs unsteady beneath you, and though the rift had closed, the air still crackled with the electricity of what had transpired. The ground beneath your feet trembled with an energy that wasn't natural, wasn't part of the world you knew. The shadows in the trees grew darker, their shapes twisting unnaturally, as though they were stretching toward you, following you with every step. The chanting, that maddening rhythmic hum, still rang in your ears, even though it was no longer spoken. It was embedded in the fabric of the forest itself, woven into the wind and the rustling of leaves. The forest had changed, and you could feel it deep in your bones. The ancient pact that had been disturbed was still alive, still waiting for its payment. And you, whether you realized it or not, were that payment. You turned to look back at the fire, its sickly green glow now dimming as though the life had been drained from it. The flame was weak, flickering, and though the storm still raged overhead, the flames no longer gave warmth. The light that had once provided comfort now felt distant, like the last remnants of hope, slowly fading from existence. But you could still hear it, the deep growl. It was growing louder, closer, and it was not coming from the rift. This sound was different, primal, and it seemed to emanate from every direction. The creature, the one that had been watching, waiting for you, it had returned and it was drawing near. You knew you had no choice but to run, to get away from the growing darkness that threatened to swallow the world whole. But where could you go? The trees, the ground, the very air, they were all part of the same force now, bound by a will older than time itself. The forest was alive, a vast, sprawling entity, and it would not let you escape. It needed you. With your breath coming in shallow gasps, you turned, your feet slipping in the mud as you sprinted deeper into the forest, away from the fire, away from the clearing. The rain came down harder now, its coldness slicing through your clothing, but you barely noticed. Your eyes scanned the darkness ahead, but you saw nothing but the endless stretch of trees, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers. The growl came again, much closer now, and then, through the trees, you saw it. The creature. It stood at the edge of the clearing, its massive form barely visible through the sheets of rain, but its glowing eyes, those twin embers, pierced the darkness, locking onto yours with an intensity that made your heart skip a beat. Its body was a shifting mass of darkness, its long, spindly limbs moving with an unnatural grace, bending and stretching in ways that were wrong, that defied the laws of nature. The shadows around it seemed to grow darker, thicker, and you realized with a sickening lurch that the creature wasn't just in the clearing. It was everywhere. Its presence had spread through the trees, through the very earth beneath your feet, as if the forest itself had become its body. It was the forest, and the forest wanted you. Your pulse raced as you turned to run again, but this time something else felt wrong. The air had changed, the atmosphere thickening, pressing in on you from all sides. The very ground seemed to shift beneath your feet, the earth pulling at you, dragging at your ankles like something trying to hold you back, to claim you. You stumbled, falling to your knees in the mud, your heart hammering in your chest. The whispers had returned, louder now, urgent, frantic, and full of hunger. You cannot escape. The voice was no longer distant. It was inside your head, pressing against your skull, clawing its way into your thoughts. The darkness around you deepened, the shadows thickening as the forest itself seemed to close in, suffocating you with its weight. The growl was almost deafening now, a deep, bone-shaking vibration that made your teeth rattle. You pushed yourself to your feet, your legs trembling with the strain of running, but the forest had already begun to close the distance. Every step you took seemed to be matched by the creature's movements, each one a silent, impossible stride that took it closer, always closer. Then, through the shifting shadows, you saw something. A faint glow, barely visible through the trees but unmistakable, a light flickering in the distance. The campfire. It wasn't the sickly green glow you had seen earlier. This light was different, brighter, warmer. It was alive, and it called to you with a sense of hope, a flicker of refuge in the middle of the storm. You had no idea why, but you knew you had to reach it. You had to make it to the fire before the forest could claim you. Every instinct in your body screamed for you to turn back, to run in the opposite direction, but the fire, the light, it was your only chance. You pushed through the trees, the branches slashing at your skin, the rain blurring your vision. The growl behind you grew louder, the creature's presence like a wall of pressure that pushed against you, but the light, it was getting closer. You could almost feel the warmth now, the flicker of the flames just beyond the trees. You broke through the last line of trees and there it was. The fire. The same campfire, now brighter and more alive than before. The flames danced in the rain, undisturbed by the storm, and for a moment, you allowed yourself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be your refuge. But as you stepped closer, something stopped you. The ground beneath the fire was different, wrong. It was dark, shifting, like the earth itself was alive, moving, pulling you into its depths. The firelight cast strange, distorted shadows that stretched unnaturally toward you, like tendrils, like hands reaching for your soul. The flames flickered and twisted, their light distorting in strange, impossible ways. And then, through the fire, you saw them, figures, emerging from the shadows, from the very flames themselves. They were tall, gaunt, their skin pale and stretched tight over their bones. Their eyes were hollow, empty sockets that seemed to gaze into your very soul. They moved with a fluid grace, as if they were part of the fire, part of the forest, part of the darkness itself. And as they moved, you could hear them speaking, whispering, their voices mingling with the wind, the rain, and the growl that still echoed through the forest. Join us. Join the forest. Join the darkness. The firelight flickered once more, and you realized too late that it wasn't the fire that had called you. It was the forest, and the fire was only another trap. The figures in the flames were no salvation. They were the forest children, born of darkness and flame, and they had come to claim you. You tried to move, to run, but the ground beneath you shifted, pulled, and the shadows around you closed in, suffocating you, trapping you in the heart of the forest. The figures surrounded you, their hollow eyes staring into yours, their hands reaching, clawing, dragging you toward the rift in the earth that had opened again. It wasn't the creature in the trees that had come for you, it was the forest itself, and it would never let you leave. The shadows closed in around you, their figures impossibly tall, their movements fluid and unnaturally fast. You could feel their cold hands reaching for you, their long, thin fingers brushing against your skin like whispers from the void. The flames of the campfire flickered again, casting a pale, sickly light on their faces, those hollow, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through you, through your very soul. Each figure was a manifestation of the forest itself, a twisted reflection of the ancient force that pulsed beneath the ground. They weren't human, not by any means, and yet there was something undeniably familiar about them. Something that felt like they had been waiting for you, watching you from the very moment you set foot in this cursed land. You tried to step back, to flee, but the earth beneath you shifted again, pulling at your feet, the mud turning to slick, oily tar that clung to your boots. It was as if the ground was alive, eager to swallow you whole, to drag you into the depths of the earth where the forest roots had spread. The figures moved closer, their hollow eyes never leaving you. The whispers that filled your mind grew louder, more insistent, a chorus of voices blending together into a single terrifying command. Come closer. There was no escaping them. There was nowhere to run. The forest had already claimed you, and now it was gathering you, pulling you toward its heart, toward the rift in the earth that was still slowly widening, as though preparing to swallow the world whole. You could feel the pull of it, the ancient hunger of the forest, the call of the dark, deep and endless, like an abyss waiting to consume everything in its reach. The figures closed in on you, their hands reaching out, but you didn't want to touch them. No, you could feel it. Their touch was death, their touch was oblivion, and you knew that if they caught you, you would never return. But then, through the rising fear and the swelling whispers, something in the back of your mind stirred. A flicker of resistance, a memory, a glimmer of light. You thought of the fire, the warmth, the brief sense of safety it had given you. You thought of your heartbeat, the rhythm of life, the feeling of air in your lungs. It was not too late. You could still fight. You could still survive. Summoning every ounce of willpower you had left, you took a deep breath, forcing your feet to move. You pushed forward, stumbling through the mud, but the figures were closing in too fast. One of them reached for you, its hand like a blade, its fingers sharp as bone. Join us, it whispered, its voice a soft, insistent hiss. The air grew colder, the whispers louder, more demanding, as though the forest itself was pressing against your very mind, trying to drown you in its darkness. But you wouldn't go. You couldn't. Not like this. Not without a fight. In that moment you saw it. The rift. It had expanded just enough for you to see the swirling mass of shadows within it, the tendrils reaching out like hungry fingers. There was something there, something vast and ancient, waiting to emerge from the heart of the forest. And yet, within that darkness, there was still a flicker of light. The fire. It was fading, but it wasn't gone yet. The last remnants of the fire's warmth still burned, just beyond the grasp of the figures surrounding you. You could almost feel its pull, its call, its promise of safety. If you could just reach it, if you could just make it back to the flame, maybe, just maybe, you could escape the forest's grasp. Summoning all of your strength, you forced yourself to move forward, pushing through the mud that clung to your boots, ignoring the coldness that spread through your limbs, numbing your body. You didn't look back at the figures, their skeletal hands still reaching for you, their eyes glowing with that haunting, otherworldly light. You focused only on the fire. The forest around you seemed to shift and warp as you moved. The trees groaned, their branches bending unnaturally, blocking your path, but you fought through it. Each step felt like it was dragging you down, but you pushed harder. You had to reach the fire. And then suddenly there it was. The flames, still alive, still flickering in the darkness, their orange glow casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. The figures were now mere silhouettes against the light, their hands still stretching, but they were farther behind, their reach no longer enough to catch you. You reached the fire, falling to your knees in the mud as the heat washed over you. The flames crackled, the warmth licking at your skin, but as you sat there, gasping for air, you realized something horrifying. The fire wasn't real. It couldn't be. The flames didn't feel right. They were cold, their heat a mirage, an illusion. The shadows around you warped unnaturally, stretching and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. And then you understood. The fire wasn't a refuge. It was a trap. A voice, soft, familiar, whispered in your ear, though there was no one around. You can't escape. You never could. You turned, heart racing, and the figures were there. They had surrounded you, their pale hands reaching out from the darkness, their hollow eyes glowing like the embers of the fire. The whispers grew louder, more overwhelming. Join us. And then the rift expanded, and the darkness within it grew deeper, swallowing the last bit of light that had remained. The forest was pulling at you again, pulling you toward the depths, toward the ancient hunger that had waited for centuries. The fire flickered one last time, its light fading to nothingness, and you were consumed. But as you were pulled into the rift, you could hear something, a sound far off, faint but growing louder. The voice of someone, something calling your name. It was faint, like a memory, a dream. But it was there, and it was the only thing that still felt like hope. But would it be enough? The world around you folded into a blur of shadows, light, and sound, as though reality itself was unraveling. The ground beneath you disappeared entirely, and you felt yourself falling, plummeting through an endless void, the air thick with a force that made your chest feel heavy, as if gravity itself had twisted into something malevolent. Your body moved through the darkness, weightless but unable to escape the downward pull, the rift pulling at your very essence like a hunger that could not be sated. The whispering voices grew louder as you fell, their words not spoken but felt, a deep hum vibrating in the very fabric of your mind. They surrounded you, pressing in from every direction, filling the void with an endless chorus of promises, threats, and ancient commands. Come, embrace the darkness. Join the roots. Become one with the endless night. But it wasn't just the rift that surrounded you now. Something else had shifted in the air, something deep and ancient, like the heart of the forest itself had come alive. The pulse you had felt earlier, the thrum beneath the earth, had grown stronger, and now it beat in time with your own heart, as though the rift was not merely a tear in the fabric of the world but the very lifeblood of the forest. For a moment you wondered if you would ever stop falling. But then, just as the pressure of the void began to overwhelm you, something changed. The fall halted. You were suspended in an unnatural stillness, floating in midair, the rift around you expanding into a vast expanse of endless shadow. It was a void, but it was not silent. The whispers still filled your mind, and you could feel the presence around you, a presence so vast, so ancient, that it seemed to stretch beyond your comprehension. And then you saw it, or rather you felt it first, a warmth, a faint, distant light that pierced through the darkness, like a flicker of hope amidst the suffocating blackness. The light grew brighter, and you realized it was coming from above, rising through the infinite expanse like the sun breaking through a thick fog. It was warm, comforting, but it was not the fire you had seen earlier. No, this was something different, something pure. Help me, you whispered, the words barely leaving your lips as you were pulled toward the light. The moment you spoke, the void around you seemed to shrink, and the voices that had surrounded you fell silent. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was no sound, no presence, just silence, and the distant warmth that pulled at you like a beacon. You could feel your body moving upward, drawn by the light, drawn by the very force of life itself. It wasn't a physical force, it was more like a calling, an invitation to return, to escape the dark, to find your way back. And yet, something tugged at you from below. The rift still existed beneath you, its vast, gaping maw stretching into the darkness, and as you looked down you could see it, the faces. Countless faces, their eyes glowing with that same eerie light, rising from the depths of the rift. They were the forest children, its ancient, twisted offspring. They were the ones who had called you, the ones who had lured you into this trap. But they weren't just watching. They were reaching up, stretching their skeletal hands toward you, their mouths open in silent screams, their hollow eyes burning with an insatiable hunger. You knew that if you descended back into the rift, if you allowed yourself to fall again, you would never return. The forest would claim you, body and soul, and there would be no escaping its clutches. The warmth from above pulsed again, brighter now, stronger. It called you, urging you to rise, to break free from the pull of the rift. The faces below were now twisting in agony, their mouths opening wider, the darkness around them thickening, but the light, your light, was stronger than their call. You reached out, stretching your hand toward the warmth, and as you did, the rift below seemed to roar, a soundless scream that vibrated through your very soul. It was as if the forest was angry, furious at your defiance, and yet the light above remained steadfast, unwavering, pulling you upward like the gravity of life itself. With a final surge of effort, you pushed yourself toward the light, and the darkness around you began to break apart, the shadowed tendrils that had been reaching for you dissolving into nothingness, as though the very force of your resistance had shattered their hold. And then, in a flash, you were free. The void, the rift, the forest, all of it disappeared. In its place was a world of light, of warmth, of solid ground beneath your feet. You gasped, your lungs filling with the air of life once again. The damp, cold air of the forest was gone, replaced by the sweet, fresh scent of the earth after a rainstorm, the smell of wet soil and pine. You were standing in a clearing. The ground beneath you was solid, firm, the grass soft beneath your feet. Above, the sky was dark, the clouds still thick with rain, but the storm had passed. The trees loomed at the edges of the clearing, but they no longer seemed threatening. They were still, silent, as if waiting for you to make the next move. And then you heard it. The voice. It was soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. You could barely make out the words, but they were clear enough. You cannot escape. Not yet. It was the voice of the forest. No, the voice of the rift. And it sent a chill through your spine, a reminder that you had not truly escaped. The forest was not finished with you. It was only watching, waiting, biding its time. The figure from the campfire, its glowing eyes, its twisted, writhing form, emerged from the shadows at the edge of the clearing, standing tall, looming, and as it did, you could see the forest begin to shift again, the trees bending and groaning, the earth trembling beneath your feet. It had followed you. The forest had always been there, a part of you, and now it was closer than ever. And in the distance, just beyond the clearing, you saw the flicker of light. Another campfire. Another trap. But now you knew. This was only the beginning. The figure stood at the edge of the clearing, its glowing eyes watching you with an unnerving calm. The forest had come alive once again, but now it felt different. Closer, more intimate, as though it had always been with you, just beyond the edges of your awareness, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The trees around the clearing whispered to each other, their branches creaking in the wind, bending toward you as if beckoning you closer. You could feel the weight of the forest pressing against you. It was like a heavy fog that wrapped around your chest, squeezing tighter with every breath you took. It was not the force of nature you had known, but something ancient, far older, and far more aware, as though it had been alive for eons, learning, watching, always waiting for the right moment to strike. The figure in front of you, the one with the hollow eyes and twisted limbs, shifted slightly, its form bending and swaying unnaturally, as if it were a part of the forest itself. The shadows around it seemed to move and ripple, merging with the trees, becoming one with the landscape. It wasn't just a figure anymore, it was a manifestation of the forest, its presence woven into every branch, every root, every drop of rain that fell from the sky. You cannot hide from the forest, the figure whispered, its voice a low, resonant hum that vibrated through the ground beneath you. The words felt like they were inside your mind, clawing their way into your thoughts. It is a part of you now, and it will never let you go. You could feel the cold air seeping into your skin, the chill spreading through your veins like ice. It wasn't just the cold of the night, it was the cold of the forest, the cold of something that had lived too long, something that had forgotten what it was to be human, forgotten what it was to feel warmth or life. The figure took a step forward, its limbs stretching impossibly long, its eyes burning with that unnatural, piercing light. You think you have escaped, but you are only here because the forest allows it. The shadows around the clearing seemed to grow darker, thickening like a fog rolling in, and the trees began to sway in unison, their trunks creaking as though they were waking from some deep slumber. You could hear the faint whispers again, rising like a chant, the voices of the forest swirling around you, their words unintelligible but full of power, of malice, of something ancient. The figure's mouth stretched wide in a grin that was not human but something far worse. Its teeth were sharp, jagged like the broken edges of shattered stone, and when it spoke again, its voice was not just a whisper but a command that shook the air around you. Come back to us. The words echoed through the clearing, and the ground beneath you seemed to ripple, the earth itself undulating as if it were alive, breathing. You could feel it then, the pull, that deep, magnetic tug at your very core. The forest wanted you, and it would not let you go. It would never let you go. But there was something else now, something new, something alive within you, something that wasn't a part of the forest. It was a spark, a flicker of resistance, of defiance. It was the last vestige of your humanity, the last thing that made you you, the last thread of the person you had been before the forest had taken root in your soul. You don't control me, you whispered, your voice barely audible above the growing chant, above the roar of the wind. I'm not yours to claim. For a moment there was silence. The trees stopped swaying. The whispers ceased. The figure stood motionless, its eyes narrowing slightly as though considering your words. The stillness stretched on, the air heavy with the tension of 1,000 unspoken things. And then the wind picked up again, but this time it was not cold. It was warm, alive, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. The whispers returned, louder now, but this time they were no longer threatening. They were calling to you. You could feel the weight of the forest gaze upon you, but now it was not filled with malice. It was filled with yearning. "Come closer," the figure said again, its voice softer now, coaxing, inviting. The shadows around it rippled like waves, and the trees seemed to lean forward, their branches extending toward you as though they were offering you something. You took a hesitant step forward, your legs trembling beneath you. The pull was undeniable. The forest wanted you, but what did it want from you? What was it offering? Was this truly the forest that had tried to claim you, or was it something else, something different? The closer you moved to the figure, the clearer the image became. It wasn't a creature of malice anymore. It was something ancient, something primal, yes, but there was something else, a deeper understanding in its eyes. The fire that had once burned in its gaze was no longer so violent. Now there was a flicker of something else, a longing, a need for something it had lost. The figure extended its hand toward you once again, the long, twisted fingers beckoning. You belong to us now. The forest needs you, and you need the forest. You could feel the ground beneath your feet shift again, but this time it didn't feel like a threat. It felt alive. The roots of the trees seemed to pulse, the earth breathing beneath you, as though the entire forest was one living, breathing entity, and you were at its heart. For the first time since you had entered the forest, you felt something, a sense of belonging. The forest was not just a place of terror. It was a place of life. Its roots ran deep, its branches touched the sky, and in the heart of it, you could feel the pulse of something older than time itself. And then, as if on cue, the light broke through the darkness above. The clouds parted and the rain ceased, leaving behind only the soft glow of the stars. The forest had quieted. The whispers had stopped. The figure in front of you no longer felt like a predator, but like a guide. "Will you join us?" it asked once more, its voice filled with an ancient sadness, but also hope, a hope that you could not fully understand. You stared at the hand it offered, the warmth radiating from it. The choice was yours. The forest had claimed you, but could you claim it in return? You took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth, and made your decision. "I am not yours to claim," you said, your voice steady now, filled with a strength that had not been there before. "But I will not run anymore. I will walk with you. I will walk through you." The figure's eyes softened. The forest sighed, a deep, rumbling sound, as though it were releasing a breath it had been holding for centuries. And so, you stepped forward into the shadows, the figure beside you, and together, you walked into the heart of the forest, where the ancient roots of the world intertwined with the very essence of the earth. But as you walked, you couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something had changed, and not just in the forest. You were no longer a stranger here. You were a part of it. As you stepped further into the depths of the forest, the darkness seemed to welcome you not as a prisoner, but as a guest. The trees that had once felt like towering giants now seemed to bow slightly as you passed, their branches whispering in a language you didn't understand, but one that resonated deep in your bones. The ground beneath your feet no longer felt cold and unforgiving, but alive, pulsing with energy, the heartbeat of the forest itself. The figure beside you moved with an ease that seemed to blend perfectly with the world around it. Its long limbs no longer seemed unnatural, but fluid, as if it were one with the very shadows that stretched and twisted at the edge of the clearing. It was no longer an enemy, no longer a predator, but a guide, a guardian, an embodiment of the forest's will. The hollow eyes that once filled you with terror now seemed softer, the flicker of emotion, regret, longing, flickering behind them. It walked beside you, neither too close nor too far, its presence comforting in a way you hadn't expected. It was as if the forest itself had made a choice. You were no longer an outsider. The further you walked, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees grew older, their trunks thick and gnarled, their bark covered in moss and lichen. Massive roots erupted from the earth, twisting and coiling like serpents, while flowers with petals of dark purple and black blossomed at your feet, releasing a sweet, heavy fragrance that was both intoxicating and soothing. And above you, the sky had cleared completely. The stars shone down like diamonds scattered across a velvet curtain, their light reflecting in the pools of water that had gathered in the forest's low spots. The air was thick with the scent of pine, earth, and something else, something ancient, something that felt both alive and eternal. The path before you was no longer clear, not in the way you had expected. There were no trails, no road markers. The forest seemed to shift, to rearrange itself as you moved, guiding you through with an intelligence that you couldn't fathom. You weren't walking through the forest as much as with it, like two forces moving in tandem, as if the forest knew exactly where you needed to go and was leading you there with each step. And then, as you rounded a corner, you saw it. The heart of the forest. It wasn't a clearing in the traditional sense, but something more, something alive, something sacred. The ground here was soft, almost like a natural carpet of moss and soft earth, but it was illuminated by an ethereal, golden glow that seemed to come from no source at all. It cast everything in a warm, almost otherworldly light, bathing the scene in hues of amber and gold. At the center of this place was a massive tree, its trunk impossibly thick, its roots spiraling out in all directions, digging deep into the earth as though anchoring the entire forest to this one point. The tree's bark was dark, a deep, rich brown with veins of silver running through it, as though it had veins of light flowing beneath its surface. Its branches stretched up into the sky, twisting and curling, while hundreds of soft, glowing orbs floated around it like fireflies, their light gentle and soothing. The air here felt different, charged, filled with a sense of peace and power, like the very earth beneath you was alive with purpose. This was no ordinary place in the forest. This was the center, the heart of everything, the source of the forest's magic, its will, its ancient spirit. The figure stopped beside you, its eyes turned toward the tree, and for a moment there was silence. The wind no longer howled, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. "This is the heart of the forest," the figure said, its voice softer than before, reverent. "This is where the roots of the world meet. It is where the life of the forest begins and where it ends. It is the place of creation and destruction, a place where the balance is maintained. Everything in the forest flows from here, its life, its power, and its death." You stared at the massive tree, awestruck by its presence. There was something alive in the air here, a pulse that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the earth, resonating with your own heartbeat. It was as if the forest had its own rhythm, its own song, and now you were a part of it, caught in its vast, eternal cycle. "The forest needs you," the figure continued, its voice low and almost mournful. "It needs your strength, your heart, your soul." You frowned. "What do you mean? How can I help the forest? I am nothing compared to this power." The figure's eyes softened. "You are not nothing. You are a part of this land, of this world. You walked here, you found your way to the heart. That means the forest has chosen you. You are a part of its cycle now, just as the roots grow and the trees rise. But the forest needs something more from you." You swallowed hard, your throat dry. "What does it need?" The figure turned toward you, its long arms reaching out toward the tree. "The balance of the forest is delicate, as is the balance of the world. The forest grows, but it also decays. It thrives, but it also destroys. It is a never-ending cycle. But now the forest is out of balance. It is shifting. The cycle is disturbed." You felt a tremor in the ground beneath you, subtle but unmistakable. The wind picked up again, and the soft, ethereal glow from the tree seemed to flicker slightly, as though something was interfering with its light. "What happened?" you asked, your voice barely above a whisper. "Why is the balance disturbed?" The figure's face twisted slightly as though in sorrow. "There are forces in this world that do not belong to the forest. There are things that seek to exploit its power, to steal its life. And now the forest is fighting back." The word sent a chill down your spine. "What can I do? How can I help?" The figure looked deep into your eyes, and for the first time you felt a weight, a responsibility. You must protect the heart. The forest has chosen you to safeguard it, to guard the balance. You must stop those who would harm it. You must help the forest restore its equilibrium, or the world will fall. The gravity of the moment crashed down on you. You had come into the forest thinking you were simply lost, trapped by its shadows. But now, standing in the heart of it, you understood. This place, this living, breathing entity, was far more than a wild expanse of trees and dirt. It was a force, a power that reached into every part of the earth, and it had chosen you to protect it. The weight of your responsibility sank in deeper, but there was no turning back now. The forest had claimed you and it needed you, and now you had to answer. The wind howled once more, louder now, carrying with it the whispers of the forest, urgent, insistent. It was as though the trees themselves were calling to you, speaking in tongues older than time, their words full of both warning and desperation. The air around you seemed to hum with energy, the very earth beneath your feet vibrating in rhythm with the pulse of the ancient heart of the forest. You turned to the figure beside you, a question burning on your tongue, but it was as though the forest itself had answered before you could ask. The figure's hollow eyes, once cold and distant, now held a flicker of something. Hope, perhaps? Or something even deeper, more primal, a recognition that you too were a part of the forest now. "The path ahead is not simple," the figure said, its voice steady, yet tinged with a hint of sorrow. To guard the heart, you must understand the balance. The forest does not simply grow. It devours, it destroys, and it renews. All things live and die within its grasp. The forces that seek to disrupt this cycle are many. Some come in the form of creatures, horrors, that twist and warp the natural order. Others come in the form of those who seek power, who seek to control the forest's power for their own purposes. A shiver ran down your spine at the mention of these forces, these horrors. You could feel the weight of your newfound responsibility pressing against your chest, like an invisible weight, heavy and suffocating. But the light from the tree, the golden glow that seemed to emanate from its very heart, bathed you in warmth, offering a strange kind of reassurance. The forest had chosen you. You had no choice but to answer its call. How do I protect the heart? How can I stop them? You asked, your voice almost lost beneath the rising wind. The figure moved closer, its presence both comforting and unnerving, as though it were something ancient and wise, and yet something that had never fully embraced its own purpose. The path of the guardian is a lonely one. It requires strength, not just of the body but of the mind, of the soul. You will have to learn to listen to the forest, to hear its whispers, its warnings. You will have to walk between the worlds of the living and the dead, for the heart of the forest is a place of both life and death, creation and destruction. The forces that threaten it are not always visible. They move in shadows in places where the light cannot reach. You nodded, though the weight of the task ahead was overwhelming. The path of the guardian, your path, was not one of glory but one of sacrifice. You would have to give up the safety of ignorance, the comfort of the known, and step into a world where darkness and light, life and death, were intertwined in ways that you could scarcely understand. The figure's gaze softened as if it could sense your hesitation. You must go to the four corners of the forest, to the places where its power is weakest. The forces that threaten the balance will attempt to destroy these points, for if they fall, the heart will follow. You must protect them, and in doing so, you will learn the true nature of the forest. You will learn to become the forest, and the forest will become you. The ground beneath your feet shifted slightly, the roots of the great tree stirring as if to emphasize the gravity of its words. The air seemed to crackle with power, and you could feel a force stirring within you, a sense of connection to the very earth beneath your feet, to the sky above, to the trees and the creatures that call the forest home. You were part of the forest now, its blood running through your veins, its roots intertwining with your own. You are ready, the figure said, its voice quiet but certain. But the journey will not be easy. You will face tests, trials that will challenge every part of you. The forest will not allow you to fail, but it will not make it easy. There are those who have come before you, guardians who have failed, and their spirits linger in the forest, lost and forgotten, trapped between worlds. They are the forest's wounds, and you will have to face them if you wish to protect what remains. The wind picked up again, swirling around you, carrying with it the distant sound of something. No, someone, calling your name, a voice from deep within the forest. The figure turned toward the sound, its expression unreadable. The first corner is to the east, it said, its voice filled with the ancient weight of wisdom and grief. Follow the river that winds through the trees. It will lead you to the hallowed grove, a place where the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. There you will face your first test. You will learn what it means to truly listen to the forest. You hesitated for a moment, 1,000 questions swirling in your mind. But before you could speak, the figure turned toward the heart of the forest, its long, shadowy form blending with the darkness as it stepped toward the ancient tree. Go now, it said, its voice fading into the wind. The forest is waiting. The words hung in the air, a heavy, unspoken promise. You took a deep breath, the scent of pine and damp earth filling your lungs. The forest seemed to watch you, its silent eyes everywhere, its presence pressing against your every step. With one last look at the great tree, its golden light casting a soft glow over the entire clearing, you turned and began your journey. The path ahead was dark, and the shadows seemed to stretch endlessly before you, but you knew now that you were no longer alone. The forest was with you, and you were with the forest. As you walked, the whispers of the trees seemed to follow you, their voices gentle, almost like a lullaby. The wind shifted, and for the first time since you had entered the forest, the air felt lighter, less oppressive. The weight on your shoulders seemed to lift, just a little, as though the forest was acknowledging your resolve. The river came into view soon after, its waters flowing swiftly through the trees, its surface reflecting the pale light of the moon. You followed it, knowing it would lead you to the hallowed grove, where your first test awaited. And as you walked, you couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching you, not just as a guardian but as something far more intimate, as if it had always known you, as if you had always been a part of it. The path ahead was unclear, the dangers unknown. But the forest had chosen you, and you had chosen to answer its call. And with each step, you felt yourself becoming more connected to this ancient living world. The journey had only just begun, but already you could feel the weight of its purpose settling into your bones. The path ahead stretched long and narrow, winding between thick trunks of trees that grew close together, their roots reaching out like fingers in search of something to hold. The air had a heavy, almost suffocating quality to it now, a dampness that clung to your skin and clothes. The distant sound of the river's flow grew louder with each step you took, its waters rushing over rocks and around bends, carrying with it a rhythm that almost seemed to whisper, soft and steady, as if urging you forward. The moon hung high in the sky, its pale light casting shadows that danced across the ground, creating a patchwork of light and dark that seemed to shift with every step you took. It was as though the forest was alive, breathing with you, watching your every movement, every breath you took. The deeper you went, the more you could feel it, the ancient power of the forest, seeping into your bones, making your blood run thick with the pulse of the earth. The whispers had not stopped since you had begun walking. At first, they had been distant, like faint echoes of the wind. But now they had grown clearer, more distinct, swirling around you like 1,000 voices, speaking in languages you did not understand but felt in your chest. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches creaking as if they were waiting for you to listen, to understand. You passed the river's edge, following its winding path as it cut through the dense forest. The sound of the water grew louder still, until you reached a point where the trees opened up, and there before you stood the hollowed grove. It was nothing like you had expected. There were no vibrant flowers or verdant green, no soft moss or sweet fragrances. The air here was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath your feet was cracked and dry, as though the very earth had been drained of life. The trees here were twisted and gnarled, their bark twisted in unnatural patterns, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands clawing at the sky. At the center of the grove stood a massive tree, its trunk wide and hollowed out, the heart of it long since rotted away. Its leaves had turned a deep, ashen gray, falling from the branches like dust to the ground. There was no life here, no vitality, only the eerie silence of something that had once lived but had been hollowed out, drained of its essence. This was the hallowed grove, the place where the veil between the living and the dead was thinnest. You could feel it in the air, a presence not of the forest but something far older, far more other. It lingered in the silence, in the way the trees groaned and shifted in the wind, in the way the earth felt empty. You stood at the edge of the grove, your heart pounding in your chest. The air here was thick with something else, something malevolent like an oppressive weight pressing down on your shoulders, pulling you closer to the center of the grove. The whispers had stopped for a moment, replaced by a quiet, distant hum, a vibration that you could feel in your bones. You've arrived, a voice spoke but not in words. No, this was different. This voice resonated within you as though it were speaking directly to your very soul. It was deep, hollow, ancient, like the voice of the forest itself, or perhaps something even older, more powerful. The balance is fragile. You are here to restore it. But first, you must face what has been lost. You felt a chill crawl up your spine as you stepped into the center of the grove. The ground beneath you seemed to shift as though it were alive, moving in a slow, deliberate rhythm. You felt the presence now, all around you, an oppressive force that seemed to fill every corner of the grove, making the air feel thick with dread. And then, slowly, the shadows in the grove began to shift. The twisted trees seemed to move, bending toward you, their branches reaching out like claws. The hollow tree at the center of the grove began to groan, its trunk creaking with the weight of centuries of decay. And from within it, something stirred. A figure emerged from the darkness of the hollow tree, moving slowly, deliberately, as though it were bound to the very earth itself. It was tall, its body draped in tattered robes made of leaves and vines, its face hidden in the shadow of its hood. The air grew colder as it approached, the very atmosphere vibrating with an ancient energy, a power that seemed to resonate with the ground beneath your feet. "I am the keeper of the hallowed grove," the figure said, its voice a low, resonating whisper that seemed to vibrate through your chest. "I have waited for you, guardian. The forest has chosen you, but you have yet to prove yourself. To restore the balance, you must face what has been lost. You must confront the spirits that linger here, trapped between worlds." The figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath your feet trembled, the earth cracking open, revealing dark, swirling shadows that writhed beneath the surface. The shadows began to rise, forming into shapes that twisted and contorted, becoming twisted, half-formed figures, like the remains of things long forgotten. They were the spirits of those who had failed before you, the ones who had come to the forest and tried to claim its power, only to be consumed by it. They emerged from the earth, their faces twisted in agony, their forms flickering like fading embers. They were the lost, the ones who had failed to protect the forest's heart, trapped forever in the hollow of the earth, their souls bound to this place, never to find rest. These are the spirits that have failed, the keeper's voice echoed in the grove. They are your trial. You must face them and prove that you are worthy. Prove that you can restore the balance. Only then will the forest accept you. The spirits began to circle around you, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, their mouths open in silent screams. The air grew thick with their presence, the shadows swirling around you, closing in. You could feel the weight of their failure, the burden of their lost souls pressing against you, urging you to turn back, to leave, to run. But you couldn't. The whispers of the forest rose again, not as a warning this time, but as a command to face your fears, to stand tall, to prove yourself worthy of the task that lay ahead. The keeper's eyes glowed faintly from beneath its hood, watching you closely as the spirits began to advance. You could feel the power of the forest coursing through you now, the ancient energy surging in your veins. You were not just a visitor in the forest anymore, you were its guardian, its protector, its last hope. The spirits circled closer, their figures shifting, merging into a single massive shape, a monstrous, shadowy figure, its eyes burning with an unholy light. It roared, the sound reverberating through the grove, and the earth trembled beneath its power. But you stood firm, your heart steady. You had been chosen. You had no choice but to face this trial, to fight for the balance. The battle had begun. The monstrous figure loomed before you, its shadow stretching across the grove like an insatiable void, swallowing the light around it. Its eyes burned with a sickly, pale glow, the light flickering like dying embers. The air grew colder with each passing second, the temperature dropping sharply as if the very essence of the forest had been drained, leaving behind nothing but rot and decay. The ground beneath your feet cracked, splitting open as the spirits swirled around you, their mournful wails rising like a chorus of the forgotten, echoing in your ears. You could feel the weight of their eyes, the heaviness of their presence. The spirits were not mere shadows or lost souls. They were the failed guardians of the past, their spirits forever bound to this cursed grove, waiting for someone to take their place. Their voices were filled with despair, but there was something else, something dangerous lurking in the depths of their eyes, a dark force that wanted to drag you into the same eternal torment they now endured. But you had no time to consider their warnings. The creature before you, the amalgamation of their collective failure, shifted, its form growing larger, more tangible. It wasn't just a figure of shadows, it was a nightmare brought to life, a reflection of everything the forest had tried to destroy. It was the embodiment of the decay, the rot that had set in when the balance of the forest was disrupted. The keeper of the grove, standing behind you, remained silent, its form flickering in and out of existence, as though it were not entirely a part of this world. It watched, waiting for you to make the first move. The wind howled through the branches of the twisted trees, their skeletal limbs creaking and groaning in the rising storm. The spirits circled around you, their forms flickering in and out, like phantoms trapped between realms. The earth trembled beneath you as the creature advanced, its massive limbs dragging through the ground like ancient roots, its movements slow but deliberate. The weight of the moment pressed down on you, the weight of the forest's hope. The energy of the land surged inside you, filling your veins with something ancient, something that had been lying dormant, waiting to be awakened. You were no longer just a wanderer lost in the forest. You were its protector, its guardian. With a deep breath, you reached out, allowing the pulse of the forest to guide you. You felt its heartbeat beneath your feet, beneath your skin. The earth knew you now. The trees whispered to you in a language that was as old as the wind itself, urging you to stand strong, to rise against the darkness. The creature lunged toward you, its maw opening wide, revealing rows of jagged, blackened teeth that seemed to stretch endlessly, hungry for your soul. The spirits roared, their ghostly forms growing more distorted, more monstrous as they pulled at the edges of reality itself, seeking to tear you apart. But you were ready. You raised your arms, letting the ancient power of the forest flow through you, the energy building in your chest until it became a palpable force, a pressure that burned through your veins, filling you with strength you never knew you had. The light of the forest, the golden glow of the heart, surged in your heart like a beacon. You focused, drawing on everything the forest had shared with you, the whispers, the rhythm of the earth, the breath of the trees. And then, with a roar of defiance, you extended your hands toward the creature. A blinding light erupted from your fingertips, pouring out like a river, surging toward the creature with the force of 1,000 storms. The shadows recoiled, the spirits screeching as the light pushed back the darkness. The monstrous figure staggered back, its form flickering as if the light was burning it from the inside out. The ground beneath it cracked, splintering as though the very earth itself was rejecting its existence. The keeper stepped forward, its presence blending with the light, its eyes glowing softly in the golden haze. "You are the forest's strength," it whispered. "You are its heart now. Stand firm. Let the roots of the world rise within you." The creature howled in agony, its form twisting and warping, but the light from your hands continued to push it back, forcing it into the cracks in the earth, back into the darkness from which it had come. The spirits screamed in a chorus of anguish, but their forms began to fade, their faces twisting in pain as they were dragged into the light, into the purification that was now happening. The wind howled, the trees groaning as if the very forest was alive, shifting, bending, breaking free of the corruption that had been festering within it. The very air shimmered, and the ground trembled as the balance began to restore itself. The creature's form began to dissolve, its massive body collapsing into the earth, where it was swallowed whole by the shadows. The last of the spirits faded, their ghostly forms dissipating like mist on the wind, their tormented wails quieting to nothing. And then silence. The golden light faded from your fingertips, the warm pulse of the forest's heartbeat slowly calming. You stood there, panting, your body aching with the exertion of the power you had just wielded. The grove was still, the oppressive weight that had hung in the air now gone. The trees, once twisted and gnarled, had straightened, their bark now gleaming with a soft, new life. The ground beneath you was no longer cracked and dry. It had healed, becoming fertile once again, rich with the promise of rebirth. The keeper of the grove stood motionless, watching you with something like approval in its glowing eyes. The spirits of the forest, those lost souls, had been freed, their eternal torment finally ending. And then the figure spoke. "The balance is restored. The forest has accepted you, guardian. You have passed the first trial." The air seemed to shift around you, as though the forest itself was exhaling a breath it had been holding for centuries. The path forward was still uncertain, but you knew now what was at stake. The forest was counting on you. Its heartbeat was steady once again, but there were more trials to face, more forces to confront, and you knew, deep in your bones, that the darkness would not stop so easily. But for the first time since you had entered the forest, you felt ready. The keeper faded into the shadows, its form dissolving like mist on the wind, leaving you alone in the now peaceful grove. The whispering trees fell silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, the sky above clear and full of stars. And as you stood there, taking in the serene beauty of the grove, you knew that the journey ahead was far from over. But you were not the same as when you first entered. You were changed, a part of the forest now. And with that change came the knowledge that you could face whatever came next, because you were no longer just a guardian of the forest. You were one with it. The forest felt different now, like a familiar presence that had always been there, but only now, after the trial, had you truly understood it. The pulse of the earth beneath your feet was steady, as though it had drawn a deep breath, exhaling the darkness that had clung to it for so long. The hallowed grove, once a place of decay and despair, had transformed into something alive, a place of rebirth. The golden light still lingered in the air, faintly glimmering through the trees like an ethereal glow, and you could feel the energy of the forest, the ancient power that flowed through its roots, through its branches, through you, coursing through your veins. But the journey was not over. The keeper's words echoed in your mind, its hollow voice resonating like a distant call. "The forest has accepted you, guardian. You have passed the first trial. There are more to come. The path is still long." You stood still for a moment, allowing yourself to absorb the enormity of what had just happened. The creature, the manifestation of decay, had been pushed back into the depths of the earth, and the spirits that had wandered the forest, lost and broken, had been freed. For now the balance had been restored. But it was only the beginning. The forest had chosen you for a reason. You had felt it deep within your heart, the weight of its power, its call to you. The forest had not simply been watching you, it had been waiting for you, calling you to fulfill your purpose. It had been a test of your will, of your strength, but also of your heart. The balance was delicate, and your role was far from over. The wind stirred the trees once more, their leaves rustling with an almost reverent whisper. The forest, it seemed, had something more to show you. You took a deep breath and began to move forward, following the winding path that seemed to stretch endlessly before you. The trees parted ahead, revealing a narrow trail that led deeper into the heart of the forest. The moon above was full, casting its silvery light across the landscape, and the air smelled fresh, like rain on dry earth. The tension that had once gripped the forest had lifted, replaced by a quiet, palpable stillness. The journey ahead would not be easy, but you had proven yourself capable. You had restored the balance, if only for a time. And now you had to learn more about the forest, its true nature, and the ancient powers that had shaped it. The path led you through the dense trees, their trunks towering high above you, their branches twisting and weaving like an intricate web. The ground was soft beneath your feet, the damp earth squelching slightly with each step, and the scent of pine and moss filled your lungs. The forest seemed to hum with life, and for the first time, you felt as if you were a part of it, not just an outsider but a living thread woven into the fabric of this ancient place. Soon you arrived at a clearing bathed in the soft glow of the moon. In the center of the clearing stood another tree, though this one was not like the others. It was enormous, its trunk wide and gnarled, its branches reaching out in all directions, casting long twisted shadows on the ground. This tree was different. Its bark was covered in symbols, ancient runes that seemed to pulse with a faint, golden light. The air around it felt charged, as though the very space itself was vibrating with power. You approached cautiously, your heart beating faster with every step. The moment you stood before the tree, you felt it, a surge of energy like a floodgate opening, rushing through you. It was a feeling unlike anything you had experienced before. It was not just power, it was knowledge, an understanding that filled your mind, filling the gaps that had been left in your consciousness since you first entered the forest. The tree's presence was overwhelming, ancient, and wise. Its energy seemed to seep into your bones, its power flowing through you like water through the roots of the earth. A voice echoed through your mind, deep and resonant. "This is the Tree of Echoes," it said, its voice as old as the forest itself. "It is the keeper of memories, the holder of secrets. It is here that you will learn the truth of the forest's past, and the fate that awaits it." You felt a tremor in the air, as though the very forest was holding its breath. The symbols on the tree's bark began to glow brighter, shifting and rearranging, forming shapes that were at once familiar and strange. The runes pulsed with an ancient rhythm, and you could sense something stirring within them, something deep and powerful, hidden for centuries. Without thinking, you reached out, your fingers brushing against the glowing symbols. The moment you touched the tree, a wave of visions rushed into your mind. Flashes of memories, images from the past, distant voices calling out from the depths of time. You saw the forest as it once had been, untouched, pure, teeming with life. You saw the first guardians, standing at the heart of the forest, their faces filled with resolve as they fought to protect the land from the forces of destruction. You saw the ancient battle that had scarred the forest, the great war between light and darkness, between the forces that sought to preserve the balance and those that sought to destroy it. And then you saw something darker. A shadow moving through the trees, a figure cloaked in black, its eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. You saw it corrupting the forest, twisting its roots, bending the trees to its will, pulling the very life from the earth. The balance that had once been so carefully maintained was shattered, and the forest had begun to rot, to wither, as dark forces took root. You saw the ancient guardians, your predecessors, fighting valiantly, but one by one they fell, their bodies consumed by the darkness that had seeped into the land. Their souls had been trapped, bound to the forest, their spirits unable to rest. And then, as the visions faded, you saw yourself. You were standing in the forest once more, but this time, you were not just a traveler. You were something else. Your eyes glowed with the same golden light that filled the heart of the forest, and the air around you hummed with power. You were the forest's last hope, the one chosen to protect it from the forces that threatened to destroy it. But you were also something more, a link between the past and the future, a guardian who would restore the balance once and for all. The vision faded, leaving you breathless, your mind reeling from the weight of what you had just seen. You had glimpsed the forest's history, its past, its fate. The darkness was not gone. It was still here, lurking, waiting for its chance to strike again. But you now understood the importance of your role. The balance was fragile, and the forces that sought to destroy the forest had not been vanquished. They were still out there, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. You took a deep breath, steadying yourself. The path ahead was uncertain, but you had learned what you needed to. The forest was alive, and it needed you. You were its guardian, and it was your duty to protect it. You turned from the Tree of Echoes, your heart filled with a new sense of purpose. The forest was counting on you. The world was counting on you. The darkness was coming, but you would be ready. The clearing around the Tree of Echoes slowly faded behind you as you stepped back onto the winding path. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees and animals. It was a living, breathing entity, and now, you were intricately tied to its fate. The visions you had seen, the haunting images of the guardians who had fallen before you, still lingered in your mind like a fog. Their spirits, trapped in the forest's depths, called out for liberation, their voices intertwining with the wind. You had learned the truth. The darkness had not been vanquished. The forces that threatened the forest still lingered, waiting for their moment to strike. And though the battle in the hollowed grove had been a victory, it was only the beginning. The forest was calling you to do more than just restore balance. It was asking you to fight an ancient evil, one that had long been a part of its story. The path before you curved deeper into the forest, leading you away from the Tree of Echoes and further into uncharted territory. The moon overhead had begun to dip lower, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The wind had died down, leaving only the faint rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. You felt a strange calm now, as if the forest was at rest, almost waiting for you to make your next move. The deeper you walked, the quieter it became. The sounds of wildlife, crickets chirping, owls calling, the distant rustle of smaller creatures, had fallen silent. It was as if the entire forest had held its breath. The stillness felt wrong, unnatural, as if something was watching you. The air was thick with tension, and with every step you took, the sense of being observed only grew stronger. You paused, taking a slow, steadying breath, but the feeling didn't fade. There was something out there, something that had been following you since you left the clearing. It wasn't the usual creatures of the forest. These watchers were more subtle, their presence like a shadow just beyond the corner of your vision. A rustle to your left made you spin, but when you looked, the darkness between the trees seemed to swallow any sign of movement. The forest remained as still as the air around you. You were alone, at least you thought you were. You continued walking, but now the path felt uncertain. It was as though the forest itself was shifting around you, the trees subtly leaning in, their branches reaching toward you like fingers, their shadows lengthening in the moonlight. The sensation of being watched had become undeniable. Every time you glanced over your shoulder, the shadows seemed to shift, flickers of movement, figures hidden within the veil of the trees, their forms impossible to fully make out. They were just out of reach, too far to see clearly but close enough for you to feel them. The hairs on the back of your neck stood up and your pulse quickened. Whoever, or whatever, was watching you didn't mean you harm. At least you didn't think they did. There was a presence about them, an intelligence that you couldn't ignore, and it wasn't malevolent. It was silent, patient, waiting for you to make the next move. It was as if the forest itself was testing you, pushing you to confront your own fears and doubts. Suddenly, the trees ahead parted, revealing a small glade bathed in moonlight. It was a serene, peaceful place, a stark contrast to the tension you had been feeling. A stream trickled through the center of the clearing, its water clear and cold, and the soft glow of fireflies danced above the surface. The beauty of the scene was almost surreal, as if it were untouched by the darkness you had faced, as if this little corner of the forest had been spared the rot and decay that had threatened to swallow it whole. But something was wrong. The moment you stepped into the glade, the feeling of being watched intensified. You were no longer alone. The figures you had glimpsed in the shadows materialized before you, stepping silently into the moonlight. They were humanoid in shape, but their bodies were covered in bark and moss, their faces obscured by intricate, twisting patterns of vines and leaves. Their eyes, however, shone brightly, a golden light that seemed to glow from within. They moved with fluid, graceful motions, but there was no sound to their steps, no rustle of leaves, no crunch of earth beneath their feet. They were silent, ethereal, like something not entirely of this world. As they drew closer, you could see that they were not entirely human either. Their forms shifted subtly, flickering in and out of the moonlight, their features almost like illusions, as if they existed on the very edge of reality. One of them, the tallest and most imposing, stepped forward. Its face was a mass of interwoven branches, the patterns constantly shifting like a living mask, but its eyes were fixed on you with a quiet, calculating gaze. Its presence was commanding, and yet there was no malice in it, only a quiet, ancient wisdom. "You are the guardian," it said, its voice like the soft crackle of leaves in the wind. Its words resonated within you, not just heard by your ears, but felt deep inside your chest. The forest has chosen you, and yet, you still do not understand the full depth of your duty. You swallowed, unsure of how to respond. "Who are you?" The words felt inadequate, but they were the only ones that came to your lips. The figure did not respond immediately, instead glancing to the others around it. They were standing in a semicircle, watching you with those piercing golden eyes, their faces expressionless but intent. The figure before you seemed to consider your question for a long moment, the air heavy with the weight of their silence. "We are the Silent Watchers," it finally said. "We have existed for as long as the forest has. We are the guardians of its secrets, the keepers of the old ways. We have watched over the balance, even as it shifted and faltered, even as the darkness crept in. We have watched the guardians come and go, each one failing in their own way until now." Your heart skipped a beat at their words. The old ways, it sounded like they were speaking of something much older than even the forest itself. Something far more ancient, something that predated the very life you now sought to protect. They were right. You didn't understand the full scope of your duty, and with every word they spoke, the weight of that responsibility grew heavier. "You have seen the past," the Watcher continued. "You have felt the darkness that grows in the forest's heart. But the battle is not just of light versus dark, of life versus death. The balance is far more intricate, far more fragile. And you must walk the path between all things, neither bound to the light nor to the shadows. Only then will you succeed in restoring the forest's heart." The word struck you like a revelation. You had been so focused on the obvious battles, the fights with the creatures of darkness, the force of decay, that you hadn't truly understood the complexity of your role. The forest's heart was not just about fighting evil. It was about balance, a delicate equilibrium that involved both light and dark, creation and destruction. You nodded, a sense of clarity beginning to form in your mind. "What do you want from me?" you asked, your voice steady despite the overwhelming sense of uncertainty that still gripped your chest. The Silent Watcher tilted its head, a movement so slight that it almost seemed like a trick of the light. "We seek nothing but the restoration of balance. But we will aid you, for the forest is yours now, as it has always been. In your journey you will find that there are many paths to walk, paths that will test your very soul. But do not fear the darkness, Guardian. You are not meant to banish it. You are meant to learn from it, to understand it." The Watchers stood in silence for a long moment, their golden eyes watching you with a mixture of expectation and knowing. Then, one by one, they turned and began to fade into the forest, their forms becoming indistinct as they blended into the shadows, leaving you standing alone in the quiet glade. The silence lingered in the air like a weight, but it no longer felt oppressive. You stood there, absorbing the wisdom of their words, feeling a shift deep within you. The journey ahead would not be simple. It would test everything you thought you knew about yourself, about the world, about the forest. But for the first time you felt ready. The Watchers had vanished into the forest like mist before the dawn, leaving you standing alone in the glade. Their words echoed in your mind, reverberating with the weight of ancient wisdom. Balance. Neither light nor dark, creation nor destruction, but the space between them. The forest was not a simple world of opposing forces as you had first believed. It was a delicate web of interconnected lives and energies, each part of the whole, none standing alone. The Watchers had shown you that the path of the Guardian would not be one of clear-cut battles. It was a path that would require understanding, not just strength but wisdom. For the first time since you had arrived in the forest, you felt truly small, not in the sense of being insignificant, but in realizing just how much there was to learn, how much you still didn't understand. The weight of your responsibility felt like a heavy cloak wrapped around your shoulders, one that could either suffocate you or be the armor that would guide you through the trials ahead. The glade was peaceful now, the tranquil glow of moonlight reflecting off the stream and the soft rustle of leaves overhead. The air, once thick with the tension of unseen eyes, now felt clean, clear, and right. For a moment, you allowed yourself to stand there in silence, gathering your thoughts, taking in the serenity of the moment. You had proven yourself in the hallowed grove, but that battle had been only one piece of the puzzle. The deeper path of the Guardian was just beginning. Taking a deep breath, you turned away from the glade, your mind still whirling with the Watcher's words. The path ahead wound through the dark forest, and though the stars above glimmered with quiet brilliance, the trees had begun to close in once again. The heavy silence wrapped around you like a second skin, yet this time there was no fear in it. There was only the steady beat of your heart, matched in rhythm by the forest's own. You walked for hours, the forest shifting around you, its presence now familiar. The wind had picked up again, sighing through the canopy of leaves. It was a soft, almost musical sound, like a lullaby of ancient times, meant to soothe and guide. There were no more creatures stirring, no more signs of life, but you felt it, life all around you. The trees were alive, the very earth beneath your feet hummed with energy. The forest was vast, and it was awake, and it was waiting. As you ventured deeper, the path began to split. Ahead, the trees parted to reveal 3 separate trails, each one leading in a different direction. The air grew colder, the ground slick with damp moss, and the moonlight filtered through the branches in narrow beams, casting long shadows on the ground. The moment you stepped into the clearing, you felt the presence of something, or someone, nearby. You paused, taking a cautious step forward, scanning the shadows. The silence here was heavier, like a cloak of expectation. It wasn't the forest now that felt alive with presence. It was something else. The air crackled with a quiet power, like the first breath of a storm, the calm before the thunder. You were not alone. From the darkness at the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged. Unlike the ethereal watchers, this one was more solid, more grounded in the physical world. A woman, tall and graceful, emerged from the shadows, her footsteps silent against the forest floor. Her face was pale, her features delicate, but her eyes glowed with a bright, unsettling light. Her long black hair shimmered like the night sky, catching the beams of moonlight, while her attire, woven from the dark vines and leaves of the forest, moved fluidly with her like the living earth itself. You stood still, watching her carefully. She was not one of the watchers, but she seemed to belong to the forest just as much as they did. Her presence was commanding, yet there was something otherworldly about her, something not human. "You walk the path of the guardian," she spoke, her voice soft yet resonant, like the whisper of the wind through the branches. The sound seemed to echo in the clearing, the forest amplifying her words. "Yes," you said, taking a step closer. "But I am still learning. I don't fully understand my role yet. What is it that you want from me?" The woman's eyes locked onto yours, a slight smile playing on her lips. "Your role is not just to protect the forest, guardian. You must also remember. Remember what came before. You must see what has been forgotten, hear what has been silenced." The words were like a riddle, and the weight of them settled on your shoulders, pressing you down. There was something in her tone, something deeper that you didn't yet grasp. She wasn't just speaking of the forest's history, she was speaking of something personal, something that tied you to this land, this forest, in ways you couldn't yet comprehend. "You're not just talking about the past," you said slowly, stepping forward. "You're talking about me, aren't you?" Her smile widened, but there was a sadness in her eyes, as though she knew something you didn't. "Yes, guardian," she said softly. "The past is in you as it is in all who walk the path of the guardian. You are the bridge between what was and what is. You are not merely a protector. You are a link to the forest's history, its memories." You swallowed, a sense of realization beginning to settle in your chest. The watchers had spoken of balance, but they had not explained the whole of it. This woman, this creature, for she was something more than human, was showing you that your connection to the forest was not just through its present, but through its very past. It was in your blood. You had been chosen not just because of who you were, but because of who you had been. "You must walk the three paths," the woman continued, her voice now tinged with a gravity that made your heart skip a beat. "Each path leads to a different part of the forest's memory. You must remember the lost guardians, the ones who fell before you. You must learn from them, see their mistakes so you do not repeat them." The words cut through the air, thick with meaning, as though they were not just instructions but a prophecy. You had faced the first trial, but the paths ahead held far more than just physical challenges. They were the paths of knowledge, of ancient wisdom that would not be given to you easily. "The paths are not the same," the woman said, as if reading your mind. "They will test you. They will show you the things you fear the most. Choose wisely, guardian. For once you walk a path, there is no turning back." You looked at the three trails before you, each one leading deeper into the forest. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their twisted limbs creating shadowy corridors that seemed to reach into eternity. A sense of foreboding settled around you, but there was also something else, a sense of purpose. The path you chose now would shape the rest of your journey. There were no easy answers, no guarantees. The woman watched you with those glowing eyes, her presence like a force pulling you toward the paths. "Choose wisely," she repeated, her voice softening. "The forest will guide you, but you must also trust in yourself." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, but there was no time to waste. You had learned that much already. Your destiny awaited, and the forest's heart called to you once more. The woman's gaze remained unwavering, her eyes like pools of light in the darkening forest. Her presence was both unsettling and comforting, as if she were the forest itself, an embodiment of its ancient, silent watch. The three paths stretched out before you, each one a passage into the unknown. The forest whispered, but the air was thick with a sense of timelessness, the trees pressing in from all sides, their roots winding deep into the earth like veins of some ancient, hidden power. You knew the time had come to choose. Each path was distinct, its atmosphere palpable. The path to the left was shrouded in mist, a soft, eerie fog that clung to the air, twisting and swirling in unnatural patterns. The trees along this route seemed to grow closer, their gnarled trunks twisted and leaning in as if they were reaching for something hidden deep within the fog. The path ahead was obscured, barely visible beyond the haze. It felt like the passage of lost memories, a place where the past had been swallowed by time, where the truth of what had once been might still linger, hidden beneath layers of dust and shadow. The middle path was open, bathed in silvery moonlight that streamed through the branches above, casting soft, ethereal light across the forest floor. The air here felt alive, full of quiet energy. The trees on this path were taller, straighter, their trunks thick with age, and the earth beneath your feet was soft, almost spongy with the scent of pine and moss. This path felt like wisdom, like the heart of the forest beating gently beneath your feet. It was inviting, familiar, but beneath its calm beauty, there was something deeper, something waiting to be uncovered. The third path, to the right, was dark and foreboding. The trees along this route twisted upward, their branches sharp and jagged, like the claws of some ancient predator. The ground here was uneven, rocky, as if the very earth had been scarred by long-forgotten battles. Shadows clung to the edges of this path, and the air grew thick with a chill that seeped deep into your bones. This path felt like sacrifice, the weight of an old wound that had never fully healed. It seemed to draw you in with its darkness, a place where something had been buried long ago, something that had been left to rot in the deep corners of the forest. The woman's voice broke through your thoughts, low and steady. The paths are your choice, guardian. But remember this, to learn the truth, you must be willing to face what has been lost. Choose the path that calls to you most deeply. For once you step upon it, there is no turning back. Her words hung in the air like a riddle, and your heart pounded in your chest as you took in the three roads. The first path, the fog-laden one, felt like a place where forgotten things lay buried. The middle path, bathed in light, felt safe, almost comforting, as if it would lead to knowledge that was meant to be found. The third path, the one that seemed to lead into shadow, spoke of something darker, something that had been buried for a reason. You thought of the Watchers, of their cryptic warning. Balance, the space between light and dark. And in that moment, you realized that perhaps the forest wasn't asking you to choose one or the other. It was asking you to confront all of it. You took a step toward the middle path, the one bathed in moonlight. The air around you felt warm despite the chill in the air. There was a sense of peace here, but it was calm. Not the exuberance of life, but the quiet serenity of something that had weathered storms, of something that had endured. As your footfall sank into the soft earth, the trees seemed to close around you, their branches reaching out, twisting in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The path seemed to stretch on endlessly, winding further into the depths of the forest. The silence here was broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves, the soft whisper of wind passing through the high canopy. It was as if the forest itself was waiting for you, its breath drawn in anticipation. The deeper you went, the darker it became. The silver moonlight faded, replaced by the faint, flickering glow of fireflies that danced through the air like stars in a vast, empty sky. The ground here was uneven, and the trees grew in strange, spiraling formations, their roots exposed like veins on the surface of the earth. It was a forest that felt alive, but not just in the way you had come to understand. This was a forest of memory, a place where the past lingered like an echo, caught between the present and something else. You walked for what felt like hours, your steps steady but hesitant, until finally the path opened up into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood an enormous tree, its trunk thick with age, its bark rough and darkened with time. Its roots sprawled outward in every direction, cracking the earth beneath it like a network of ancient veins. But it wasn't just the tree that caught your attention, it was the carvings etched into its bark. The symbols were unlike anything you had seen before, intricate and alien, a language written in the curves and angles of the tree's surface. Some of the carvings were worn down, faded by time, while others were sharp and clear, as though they had been carved just yesterday. The symbols seemed to whisper, as though they were trying to tell you something, but you couldn't make out the meaning. They were ancient, older than the forest itself, and yet they pulsed with an energy that felt familiar. You stepped closer, your hand reaching out to trace the markings, the tips of your fingers brushing against the bark. The moment you touched it, a surge of power shot through you. It was like a shock to your system, a jolt of electricity that made your heart race and your breath catch. The symbols seemed to come alive beneath your fingers, glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. And then, as if the tree itself had awakened, the ground beneath you trembled. The earth cracked, and a deep, guttural sound echoed from within the roots of the tree, as though something ancient, something buried, was stirring to life. The air grew thick with a heavy energy, an oppressive force that weighed on your chest and made it hard to breathe. The tree groaned, its massive limbs creaking as they swayed in the windless air. The roots beneath your feet began to move, slowly, like the crawling hands of some long-forgotten giant, reaching for you. You took a step back, but the tree seemed to pull you closer, as though it were calling to you, beckoning you into its depths. The symbols on the bark shifted, swirling in a pattern that you could almost understand. They began to take shape, coalescing into images of ancient guardians, their faces obscured by masks of bark and leaves. Their eyes were hollow, their expressions frozen in eternal fear. You saw flashes of battles fought long ago, the clash of light and dark, the death of those who had tried to protect the forest's heart. You saw them, the ones who had failed, the ones whose spirits now haunted the edges of this world, their souls bound to the very earth itself. Suddenly, the vision snapped away, leaving you breathless and disoriented. The ground beneath you shifted again, and the energy that had been coiled in the roots now seemed to be focused on you. You could feel it deep within your bones. The ancient force of the forest's memory was coursing through you. And you realized then that the path you had chosen, the one bathed in light, had not been a place of calm serenity. It was a path to remembering. A path to seeing the forest's true heart, the truth of its past, the dark and light that had shaped it. You had not just chosen a path. You had chosen to know. And the journey into the depths of the forest's memory had only just begun. The tree before you groaned again, the sound deep and ancient, reverberating through the earth. The roots shifted beneath your feet, their slow, deliberate movement like the waking of something ancient. The air hummed with power, an energy older than anything you had yet experienced. You had walked the path of memory, but now you were beginning to understand the weight of that decision. The trees groaning, the shifting of the earth, it was as if the forest itself was awakening to you, revealing its deepest secrets. And with those secrets came a truth that could not be ignored. You stepped back, your breath shallow, trying to steady yourself. The tree's bark seemed to pulse with life, the symbols on it shifting, twisting into shapes you couldn't quite understand, forming stories, tales of the guardians who had come before you, their faces warped in agony, their eyes wide with fear and regret. You could feel the weight of their gaze, the unspoken words, as if they were trying to warn you, trying to tell you something. But the message was tangled, lost in time, lost in their failed attempts to protect the balance that now seemed so fragile. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving you standing there, alone in the clearing. The roots had settled, no longer shifting beneath you. But the feeling lingered, the heavy presence of the past, of the ancient power that now flowed through you. You had made your choice. You had chosen the path of memory, of knowing. But knowing was not a gift, it was a burden. You took a deep breath, steadying yourself against the overwhelming sense of something that had been long buried, long forgotten, but now stirred beneath the surface of the forest. The tree, its roots sprawling like veins, seemed to pulse with the energy of the past. It was the heart of the forest's history, its soul, its very foundation. And you had touched it. A whisper fluttered through the leaves above you, the sound faint at first, like a sigh in the wind. It was followed by another, then another, until the entire forest seemed to be murmuring, as if it were speaking to you, sharing its secrets. The words were not clear, but the sensation was. The trees were aware. They were alive, not just in the sense of being rooted in the earth, but in the sense of knowing. The memories of the forest had been hidden deep beneath the surface, but now they were beginning to resurface. And you were the one who would face them. You turned your attention back to the tree, feeling a pull, an irresistible force that called you closer. This was not just a tree, it was a gate, a threshold to the past. And the path of memory would lead you deeper still into the heart of the forest, into the very essence of what had once been. Tentatively, you placed your hand against the bark again, your fingers tracing the shifting symbols. This time, the tree's pulse was more distinct, stronger. It was as though the tree recognized you, acknowledged your presence. The roots stirred beneath the earth once more, and the symbols on the tree's surface began to glow with an otherworldly light. The ground beneath you trembled, and the air around you thickened. You felt the energy grow heavier, pressing in from all sides. The vision from before returned, more vivid, more intense than ever. But this time, the story it told was not of the past alone. It was yours. You saw yourself, no longer just the guardian, but something more. You saw yourself walking through the forest years ago, your footsteps echoing through the quiet woods. You were different then. Your form was lighter, more ethereal, as though you had not yet become fully grounded in the world of the living. You were floating, almost, your body a mere shadow of what it had become now. You walked alone, your eyes hollow, your face expressionless, and yet, there was something in your gaze, something searching, yearning. You saw the forest then in its prime. The trees were lush, the air vibrant with life. The spirits of the forest were full of energy, dancing in the wind, their laughter ringing through the leaves. The guardians of the past stood with you, their eyes filled with hope and determination. Together, you were the protectors of the balance, the guardians of the forest's heart. But then the darkness came. It was not a sudden thing, not a flash of destruction. It was slow, insidious, creeping through the forest like a poison. The trees began to wither, the once vibrant air grew thick with rot. You watched as the guardians struggled, as they fought to protect the forest from the creeping shadow. Their faces twisted with pain, their eyes wide with desperation. You saw the once unbreakable unity between the guardians shatter as the darkness split them apart, turning them against each other. The struggle was hopeless. The darkness consumed them, one by one, their spirits fractured and scattered across the forest. You watched as their bodies fell, their lives snuffed out like flickering candles in a storm. The forest groaned under the weight of the corruption, its once immaculate beauty now scarred by the ravages of decay. And then there was you, standing at the center of it all, your form more solid now but still filled with the same haunting emptiness. You were different. You had become a part of the forest, not just its protector but its memory. You were tied to the land, a link between the past and the present, the living and the dead. But you had failed. Just like the guardians before you, you had failed to protect the balance. You had become a memory, a part of the forest's long history of loss. The vision flickered, and you found yourself standing alone again, breathless, your heart racing. The air was thick with the weight of the past, and the tree's pulse continued to thrum beneath your fingers. You had seen the truth. You had seen the failure, the moment when the guardians before you had fallen, their hopes and dreams lost in the shadows of time. But you were not them. You were you. The tree groaned again, its roots shaking, and you could feel its energy swell within you, filling you with a deep, overwhelming power. This was the forest's memory, its history, its pain. And now it was yours to carry. But with it came knowledge. Knowledge that you could choose a different path, that you did not have to fall as they had. You were the link between the past and the future, the one who could restore the balance that had been lost. The forest's whispers grew louder, urging you onward. The memory of the past was heavy, but it was not your burden alone. It was the key to your path, the knowledge of what had been lost, the wisdom of the guardians who had fallen before you. The roots of the tree began to recede, and the light from the symbols began to dim, as if the vision had reached its end. But the forest was not finished with you. The path ahead was still unclear, the trials yet to be faced. The tree's energy lingered in the air, filling you with a sense of purpose, a sense of duty. You turned away from the tree, your heart still heavy with the weight of what you had seen. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. You were not just a guardian. You were the bridge between the forest's past and its future. And you would fight to ensure that the darkness that had once consumed the forest would never return. The tree's pulse faded as the roots withdrew beneath the earth, and the soft glow from the ancient symbols dimmed to a faint, lingering warmth. The weight of the vision was still heavy in your chest, the images of the past twisting and turning in your mind like a tangled web. You had seen the failures of those who had come before you, the guardians who had tried and ultimately fallen to protect the forest's balance. Their spirits were scattered, their lives shattered, their hopes drowned in the darkness that had consumed the land. But now you were more than just a witness. You were the one who stood at the threshold of change, the one who could alter the course of the forest's future. The power that surged through you, born from the roots of the ancient tree and its memory, had imbued you with a sense of purpose unlike anything you had ever felt before. You were not bound by the past, but by the promise of what was to come. The air around you was still, the forest quiet and watchful, as though waiting for your next move. The path stretched before you, winding deeper into the heart of the woods, and it was clear that your journey had only just begun. There were more trials ahead, more tests to face, but this time you were ready. The knowledge you had gained from the tree, from the ancient symbols and the echoes of the fallen guardians, had armed you with something far more powerful than strength or skill. You had been chosen, not just for your will to protect, but for your understanding of the balance. You understood now that the forest was not simply a place to guard. It was a living entity, its roots stretching deep into the earth, its life force pulsing through every tree, every leaf, every gust of wind. And within that life force lay the memories, the scars, and the wisdom of ages past. It was both a sanctuary and a battlefield, a place of creation and destruction, light and dark. The path you had chosen would not be an easy one. You could feel that deep in your bones. But with the weight of the past came the strength of the present. The guardianship of the forest was not a title, It was a responsibility, a commitment to both protect and remember. And as you walked forward, the forest's whispers became louder, more insistent. There was no turning back. You continued along the path, your feet moving with purpose, the cool night air brushing against your face as the trees parted to reveal a dense thicket ahead. The canopy above had thickened, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground like fingers, reaching for you, pulling you deeper into the unknown. The forest was alive with hidden life, but the stillness had returned, the quiet hum of the wind in the leaves masking whatever creatures lingered in the darkness. The moon, once full and bright, was now obscured by thick clouds that rolled across the sky, casting the world in shifting twilight. The air grew colder as you moved deeper into the forest. The silence was oppressive now, not peaceful, but heavy with the weight of something ancient, something waiting. The path before you had become narrower, and the trees around you grew darker, their bark now twisted, gnarled, and blackened as though scarred by time itself. Your heart quickened, and you could feel it, the presence of something unseen, something that watched from the darkness. The hairs on the back of your neck stood on end, and you instinctively reached for the dagger at your side, though you knew it was no longer fear that gripped you. It was awareness. Something was moving in the shadows, something that knew you were here, knew you were part of the forest now. A sound, like a faint scraping of branches against stone, reached your ears. You froze, every muscle in your body tensing. The movement was too deliberate to be an animal, too purposeful to be wind. It was something else, something that had been waiting, watching, and now it was drawing nearer. Another sound. A hiss, soft but sharp, like the sound of air escaping a wound. You turned quickly, scanning the trees around you, but the shadows remained still. Your breath caught, and for a brief moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath with you. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the sound faded. But the presence remained. It was as if the forest itself had shifted, its once familiar landscape now turning unfamiliar and strange. The path, once clear, was now thick with creeping vines and roots, making every step a challenge. The trees closed in, the air growing heavier with every breath. It was as though the very forest was drawing you deeper, pushing you into the heart of its mystery, into the unknown. Ahead, the path forked again, splitting into two distinct trails. To the left, the path seemed to descend into a hollow, the trees bending low, their limbs tangled in a dark embrace, as if trying to shield whatever lay hidden within. The air around this trail was thick, heavy with something ancient, something dark. It was a path that spoke of secrets, buried beneath layers of earth and time, waiting for someone to unearth them. To the right, the path led upward, the trees sparse here, the canopy higher, allowing the moonlight to filter through in thin, pale beams. This path felt more open, less oppressive, but the feeling of being watched did not fade. Instead, it deepened, as though the very forest were waiting for you to make your choice, to decide where you would go next. You stood still for a moment, taking in the two paths, sensing that they would each lead you somewhere different, somewhere unknown. The path to the left promised the dark, the hidden, the forgotten, the path of secrets that lay buried. The path to the right, though open and bathed in light, felt no less dangerous. It was as if the very forest itself awaited you on either trail, ready to reveal its mysteries in time. A voice, soft, distant, yet familiar, whispered through the trees, a voice you had heard before, yet couldn't quite place. "The truth lies in the shadows," it murmured, "but the light may guide you when the time is right." The forest around you seemed to shift again, the air growing heavier with the weight of its ancient presence. It wasn't a choice between good or evil, light or dark. It was a choice between remembering and knowing, a choice between uncovering secrets that had long been buried and following the path that had once been laid before you. You could feel it, deep within the earth beneath your feet, a silent call from the roots of the trees, a whisper from the depths of the forest. It was a test. The forest was watching, waiting for you to make your decision. And the truth of the forest, the key to restoring the balance, would only reveal itself once you chose. The path ahead was yours to take, but no matter which you chose, you would have to face the dark truths hidden deep within the forest's soul. Your decision was not just about the path you would walk, it was about the very essence of who you would become as the guardian. Would you seek the truth that lay buried in the shadows, or would you follow the light, trusting in the guidance of the past? The choice was yours. The forest held its breath, the heavy air pressing down on you as you stood at the crossroads. The whispers, soft but insistent, seemed to pulse from the very trees themselves, as though they were living beings with thoughts and desires of their own. Each path, left or right, pulled at you, each with its promise of revelation. The shadowed path on the left seemed to call you with the weight of secrets, ancient and forgotten, buried deep within the earth. The path to the right, open and bathed in moonlight, felt like a beacon, but one that might lead you into the unknown, towards something just as dangerous in its clarity as in its obscurity. You took a deep breath, letting the scent of earth and rain fill your lungs. There was no easy answer here, no simple choice between good and evil. You could feel the balance shifting, the weight of the forest decision pressing against your soul. And in that moment, you knew, the forest was not offering you the path of least resistance. It was offering you the path that would test you most. The voice, soft and distant, echoed once more through the rustling leaves. The truth lies in the shadows, but the light will guide you when the time is right. It was a riddle that you had yet to fully understand, but one that spoke to the very heart of your journey. You were standing on the edge of something ancient, something that had shaped the forest's past, and now it was shaping your own future. Without thinking, your feet began to move toward the left, toward the shadowed path. You knew this decision would not be an easy one. The path of shadows was not for the faint of heart. It was the road less traveled, the one that led to places forgotten by time, to memories buried beneath layers of earth and regret. But something about it called to you, a deep, almost primal pull that you couldn't ignore. It was as though the forest itself was urging you to remember, to unearth the forgotten past, the secrets hidden in the very roots of the land. The moment you stepped onto the darkened trail, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew thick, heavy with the weight of something old and buried. The path before you became narrow, the trees bending low, their limbs twisted in unnatural shapes. The darkness seemed to close in around you, the canopy above blocking out what little light remained. It was as if the very forest was retreating, leaving you to walk alone, surrounded by the darkness of ages past. The ground beneath your feet was uneven, the earth soft and spongy with the decay of centuries. The scent of wet moss and rotting leaves hung in the air, and the sound of your footsteps was muffled by the thick carpet of earth. The path ahead wound deeper into the forest, twisting and turning as though it were deliberately trying to lose you. Every step you took felt like a step into the unknown, a step into the heart of the forest's hidden history. As you ventured further, the trees began to change. Their bark grew darker, rougher, the twisted roots emerging from the earth like the limbs of some great beast, reaching out to touch you, to draw you deeper. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling around you like the wind through the leaves. Their voices were harder to ignore, harder to understand, but you could hear the underlying urgency, the sense that the forest was trying to warn you, trying to tell you something you weren't yet ready to hear. Then, as if in answer to your unspoken questions, the path opened into a clearing. At the center of the clearing stood a massive stone altar, ancient and weathered by the passage of time. The stone was dark, almost black in the dim light, and covered in intricate carvings, symbols that seemed to shift and change the longer you looked at them. It was as though the very stone itself were alive, breathing, pulsing with an energy that radiated from deep within the earth. You could feel the power radiating from it, a force so ancient and primal that it made your skin crawl. The altar stood at the edge of a deep chasm, its edge crumbling away into the abyss below. The chasm seemed to stretch on forever, its depths filled with shadows that seemed to move, as though the very darkness of the world had been gathered in this one place. It was a place of deep, consuming emptiness, a place where even the forest itself had been swallowed by time. You stepped closer to the altar, drawn to the symbols etched into its surface. They were familiar, though you couldn't place why. The markings seemed to mirror the patterns you had seen earlier, the symbols carved into the tree, the ones that had shown you the vision of the past. They were the same, yet there was something new here, something you hadn't yet seen. As you reached out to touch the stone, the air grew colder, the whispers rising in intensity. The symbols on the altar began to glow, faintly at first, then brighter, their light spilling out into the darkness like stars in a forgotten sky. The ground beneath your feet trembled, and you could feel the pull of the chasm, the feeling of something calling to you from the depths below. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the clearing. It was neither a whisper nor a shout, but something in between, a sound that seemed to vibrate in your very bones. "You seek the truth," the voice said, the words like a rumble of thunder. "But the truth is not easily found. It is buried deep, beneath layers of pain and loss, and only those who are willing to face it can hope to restore what has been broken." The voice faded, leaving behind a profound silence. You stood there, heart pounding in your chest as the light from the altar flickered and dimmed. The weight of the voice's words settled over you like a shroud. The truth you sought was buried, not just in the earth but in the very fabric of the forest's history. It was a truth of loss, of sacrifice, of those who had given everything to protect the balance. And now, it seemed that you were being asked to join them, to give something of yourself in order to unearth that which had been buried. You stepped back, feeling the oppressive weight of the chasm behind you, the darkness that beckoned. The altar had shown you that the truth was not just about what had happened in the past, it was about what had been lost, what had been sacrificed in the name of protection. It was about the choices made in the face of overwhelming darkness, the choices that had led to the present. You felt the pull of the chasm once more, a dark, magnetic force that seemed to draw you closer to the edge. Something was down there, something that needed to be found, something that could change everything. But what price would you pay to uncover it? You could feel the choice before you, sharp as a blade. The forest, the altar, the chasm, everything seemed to wait for your decision. But the truth, as you had learned, would not be given freely. It would demand something in return. And as you stood there at the edge of the abyss, you wondered, were you ready to face it? The chasm before you seemed to grow wider with each passing moment, its shadowy depths swallowing the light, pulling it into the void. The altar behind you now felt distant, its faint glow barely illuminating the edges of the stone. Every fiber of your being screamed to turn away, to abandon this place and seek the path of light instead. But you knew that the truth you sought lay below, in the depths where the forest's darkest memories had been buried. The whispers that had followed you through the forest had grown silent, but their absence only made the stillness more oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath. You stepped closer to the edge of the chasm, your heart racing as you peered down into the inky blackness below. The distance was impossible to gauge, there was no end, only an endless spiral of darkness, as if the very earth had opened up to reveal an abyss that had been waiting for eons. The air was thick here, heavy with a sense of emptiness, a quiet hunger that seemed to reach out and pull at you, urging you to step closer, to descend into the unknown. For a moment, the pull of the chasm was all-consuming. It felt like a call to the very core of your being, a summons from something ancient and forgotten. But you resisted. You knew that the abyss was not just a physical void, it was a metaphor, a test of your will, of your resolve. To step into the darkness without knowing what awaited would be to surrender yourself to the forest's deepest secrets without ever understanding the cost. But the truth, as you had learned, was never easy to grasp. A soft wind began to stir around you, a whisper on the breeze. It was a voice, not one you could hear with your ears, but one you felt deep within your chest, like a memory that was just out of reach. You cannot hide from what has been buried, guardian. The darkness does not ask permission. It simply waits. The words seemed to echo in the chasm, bouncing off the unseen walls and returning to you with a weight that pressed down on your soul. The voice was not familiar, it was not one of the watchers, nor the whispering spirits of the forest. It was older, deeper, a voice that seemed to come from the very core of the land itself. For a brief moment you hesitated. The darkness beckoned, its cold fingers grazing your thoughts. You could feel the weight of your decision, the gravity of the path you were about to take. There was no guarantee of what lay below. The abyss could swallow you whole, mind and soul, leaving only a broken memory behind. But there was also the promise of answers, the knowledge you sought, and the power to restore the balance that had been broken so long ago. Could you face it? Could you truly embrace the truth of the forest's past? The wind stirred once more, carrying the scent of wet earth and the sharp tang of metal. The taste of it was bitter on your tongue, like the remnants of something long forgotten, something that had been sealed away for a reason. The choice was before you, as stark as the abyss that stretched out at your feet. With a deep breath, you made your decision. You would face the darkness. You took the first step. The ground beneath you was uneven, crumbling away in places, but you moved with purpose, your hand brushing against the rough stone of the chasm's edge. Each step felt like it drew you deeper into the earth, as if you were sinking into the very bones of the forest. The air grew colder still, the wind now a low, mournful moan that seemed to echo from the depths below. The path was treacherous, the stones slick with moisture, but you pressed on. The darkness around you seemed to grow thicker with each step, and the whispers returned, but now they were not just words, they were visions. Flickers of movement, flashes of light, and then silence. You saw shadows moving just beyond your reach, forms that felt like memories. Memories of things long past, things that had been forgotten, locked away beneath layers of earth and time. You stumbled once, your foot slipping on the wet stone, but you caught yourself, steadying yourself against the jagged wall. It was then that you noticed something strange. The deeper you went, the more the walls of the chasm seemed to shift. The stone was not natural, it was carved, shaped by hands long since turned to dust. There were symbols here too, etched into the stone, hidden beneath the thick layers of moss and decay. The symbols were faint, almost invisible in the low light, but as you traced them with your fingers, they seemed to come alive. The air crackled with energy, and the whispers grew louder, clearer, as though the very walls of the chasm were speaking to you, revealing their secrets. You could hear fragments of old conversations, echoes of guardians from long ago, their voices filled with fear and regret. "We failed," one voice whispered, a tremor of despair in its tone. "The balance was never meant to be kept. It was a lie we told ourselves." "The forest," another voice, older and more somber, whispered. "It is not what we think. The darkness was never an enemy, merely a part of us." The words swirled around you, growing louder as you descended. The deeper you went, the clearer the voices became. They were speaking of something that had been hidden, something that had been misunderstood for centuries. The forest, the balance, the guardians, it was all more complicated than you had been told. The truth you sought was not a simple story of light versus dark, good versus evil. It was a story of interconnectedness, of forces that were not just opposed, but deeply entwined in a way you could not yet comprehend. And then, as if in response to your thoughts, the darkness around you shifted. The walls of the chasm seemed to widen, and you found yourself standing on the edge of a vast, underground cavern. The cavern was alive with a soft, eerie glow, the light coming from the walls themselves, from the stone. The air here was thick with power, an ancient, primal force that hummed beneath your skin, vibrating in the very core of your being. In the center of the cavern stood a pedestal, the stone etched with symbols you had seen before. But this time they were clearer, sharper, more defined. They were not just markings, they were coordinates, maps to something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of the forest itself. The pedestal was empty now, but you could feel the presence of something waiting, something that had been left behind, something that had been locked away. You approached the pedestal, your heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and fear. This was it. This was the moment you had come for. The truth, the answers, lay here, hidden in this ancient, forgotten place. The air around you was thick with the scent of earth and stone, and as your fingers brushed against the pedestal, the symbols flared to life. A voice, ancient and deep, reverberated through the cavern. "The past is never truly gone, Guardian. It is always with you, waiting in the shadows." The ground beneath you trembled as the cavern shifted, and the pedestal began to glow with a bright, blinding light. And in that moment, you knew you were standing on the precipice of something far greater than you had ever imagined. The truth of the forest, the balance between light and dark, had always been hidden here, beneath the surface, beneath the earth itself. And now you were about to uncover it. The light from the pedestal flared, blinding for a moment before slowly fading, leaving behind a soft, ethereal glow that bathed the cavern in an unsettling, otherworldly light. The symbols carved into the stone walls, now illuminated, pulsed in rhythm with your heartbeat. They seemed to watch you, their shapes shifting, curling into patterns that seemed almost alive, as though they were speaking to you in a language older than time itself. The cavern, once silent, now hummed with energy, a low, steady vibration that echoed in your bones. The air felt heavy with power, ancient and untamed, yet there was a deep sense of waiting, a presence that filled the cavern, something watching you, guiding you forward. You could feel it, something that had been buried here for centuries, something that had been waiting for someone like you to uncover it. As your hand hovered above the glowing pedestal, the symbols upon it flickered and shifted, rearranging themselves into a coherent image. A map, a sequence of paths leading deep beneath the earth, intertwined with symbols you had seen before in the forest, on the trees, and carved into the stones of the chasm. The map was not just of this cavern, but of the entire forest, its roots, its heart, its very essence. The pedestal's glow brightened once more, and the air around you seemed to grow thicker, like the cavern itself was coming alive. A low, distant rumble reverberated through the stone, and a deep, resonant voice echoed from the shadows, a voice that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "You stand on the edge of what has been lost," the voice said, its tone heavy with an ancient sorrow. "The forest was not created to be protected, but to be understood. To heal, it must remember. The balance is not an act of preservation, it is an act of reconciliation." The words hung in the air, their meaning not entirely clear, but their weight undeniable. You could feel the tension in the cavern, the air thick with the resonance of the past. The ancient power that pulsed through the earth seemed to reach out to you, drawing you deeper into the mystery. The pedestal's glow began to fade again, but not entirely. It left behind a faint trail of light that wound down a narrow passage at the far end of the cavern. The voice spoke once more, its presence growing stronger. "You have seen what came before, Guardian. You have felt the pain of those who came before you. But it is not enough to merely remember. To restore the balance, you must face the heart of the forest. The past and the future must converge here, in the heart of the earth." The earth beneath you trembled again, but this time, it felt like an invitation, an urging. The cavern's walls seemed to stretch upward, the ceiling now lost in shadow, and you could feel the power rising from beneath, as though the very earth was urging you to descend further, to uncover what had been hidden for so long. You knew you had a choice. The path forward led deeper into the cavern, further into the heart of the forest's secret. The light from the pedestal now flickered weakly, its glow dancing across the rough stone of the passage ahead. The path seemed narrow, winding, and uncertain, but the pull was undeniable. The symbols on the pedestal, the map, the whispers, it all pointed to one thing: the heart of the forest buried deep beneath the earth. With a steadying breath, you stepped forward, your footfall echoing in the vastness of the cavern as you made your way toward the narrow passage. The walls seemed to press in on either side, the air growing colder with each step. The light from the pedestal faded behind you, and the only illumination now came from the faint glow of the symbols that etched themselves into the walls of the tunnel, lighting your way forward. As you moved deeper, the air grew thicker still, and the walls seemed to pulse with a faint, rhythmic energy. The whispers returned, this time louder, clearer. They were no longer just words, they were visions. You saw flashes of the past, flickers of light and shadow, moments of pain and joy, of struggle and triumph. You saw the ancient guardians, their faces obscured, but their movements urgent, desperate, as they tried to hold the forest's balance in place. And then you saw the moment of breaking. The point where the balance fractured, where the forest's heart was poisoned by an ancient force, by a darkness that was not foreign but native. The forest was not just the product of light and dark, of life and death. It was the product of both, intertwined in ways that could not be understood until now. The tunnel ahead grew narrower, the walls closing in, and the glow from the symbols seemed to flicker as though struggling to stay alive. The earth beneath your feet began to vibrate more intensely, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The truth cannot be kept in the shadows any longer, the voice from before echoed in your mind. The forest is not just a place of life. It is a place of rebirth. And the heart of the forest must be healed before it can regrow. You must face the darkness that lives within it. You pressed forward, your heart pounding in your chest as the passage ahead finally opened up into a vast chamber. The space was cavernous, stretching far beyond what you could see. And in the center of it, standing atop a raised platform of ancient stone, was the source of the forest's power. The heart of the forest was a tree. But unlike any tree you had ever seen before. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, covered in twisted roots that seemed to stretch into the very earth beneath it. Its bark was dark and smooth, almost like obsidian, with veins of glowing light running through it, pulsing in rhythm with the heartbeat of the forest itself. The tree towered above you, its branches stretching out like the arms of some great, forgotten god, its leaves a deep, luminous green that shimmered with an ethereal glow. But the heart of the tree was not as it should be. At the center of the trunk, where the heart of any tree would be, there was only darkness. A swirling void that seemed to devour the light around it, pulling everything into its depths. It was as though the very soul of the forest had been ripped out, leaving behind only emptiness. This was the wound, the source of the forest's decay, the cause of the balance's fall. And it was here, at the very heart of the earth, that you would face the truth of what had happened. The darkness in the tree's heart seemed to reach for you, like a living thing, an ancient, insatiable hunger. And you knew in that moment that the forest's true heart was not just about light or dark. It was about understanding, about the fusion of both, and the healing that could only come when the balance was restored. The question now was this: could you heal the wound? Could you face the darkness that had poisoned the heart and restore the forest to its rightful state? You reached out toward the heart of the tree, your fingers trembling as you neared the dark void. And as you did, you realized this was not just a forest. This was the beginning of everything. You stood before the heart of the forest, the massive tree with its obsidian trunk and pulsating veins of light. The darkness at its center loomed before you, a swirling void that seemed to beckon with an insatiable hunger, a cold, empty presence that swallowed everything around it. It was not just a wound, it was the source of the forest's affliction, the very core of the imbalance that had plagued this ancient land for centuries. The forest's breath seemed to hold, the air thick with anticipation, as if the very earth beneath your feet was waiting for your next move. The darkness inside the tree throbbed with a rhythmic pulse, matching the beat of your heart. It was alive, aware, and as you stood there, you could feel it watching you, waiting. The whispers that had followed you through the forest grew louder, now more insistent, but their tone was no longer one of warning. They were urging you forward, as if they knew this was the moment that everything hinged upon. The voices were not just the voices of the past, they were the voices of the forest, of its soul, of its memories. "You have come far, guardian," one voice whispered, its tone heavy with sorrow. "But you are not alone. The forest is with you. It has always been with you." You could feel the presence of the forest more clearly now, like an invisible weight pressing down on your shoulders, the very air vibrating with its energy. The darkness inside the tree seemed to swirl faster, pulling at the light around you, trying to devour it, to consume you. You reached out, your hand trembling as you approached the heart of the tree, the swirling void that seemed to devour everything. Your fingers hovered just above the dark, cool surface of the bark, and as they made contact, a shock of cold surged through your body, like a jolt of electricity that froze you in place. The darkness beneath your fingertips pulsed, thrumming with a deep, ancient power that vibrated through your very bones. It was the power of the void, the balance that had been lost, and the dark force that had once been a part of the forest's essence. The air around you thickened, and the whispers grew louder, their voices now more urgent, as though the forest was pleading with you. The heart must be restored. The balance must be healed. Only then will the forest be free of its corruption. The words echoed in your mind, and you knew, deep within your heart, that the darkness you felt was not merely a force of evil. It was the very absence of light, the emptiness that came from the loss of connection. It was the point where the balance between creation and destruction, life and death, had shattered. The forest's heart was not just a place. It was a concept, an idea that had been fractured by time, by the actions of those who had come before you. The more you touched the tree, the more you understood. The darkness was not something to fear, it was something that needed to be understood. It was not simply the absence of life, it was the place where life and death converged, where the eternal cycle of decay and rebirth was born. To heal the forest, you would have to reconcile these forces, to mend the rift that had torn the balance apart. The light from the pedestal, still faintly glowing behind you, flickered and dimmed, and in that moment you knew. The forest was not asking for the elimination of darkness. It was asking for balance, for the restoration of a harmony that had been broken long ago. You closed your eyes, steadying your breath as you focused on the heart of the tree. The void within it seemed to deepen, drawing you in, and the swirling darkness threatened to consume you. But you resisted. You reached deep within yourself, tapping into the ancient knowledge that the forest had bestowed upon you. The knowledge of the guardians, of the bond between the living and the dead, between light and dark. You had learned the truth of the forest's essence, that everything was interconnected, that light and dark were not opposites, but parts of a greater whole. In the silence of the cavern, you let go of your fear, your hesitation. You understood now that to heal the heart, you had to face the darkness not as an enemy, but as a part of the forest's soul. You had to offer the forest a choice, to embrace both the light and the shadow, to bring them together in a union that would restore the balance. And so, with a steady breath, you stepped forward, placing your palm against the obsidian bark of the tree. The moment your hand made contact, the darkness inside the tree surged, a cold rush of energy flooding your veins. The ground beneath you trembled, and the walls of the cavern seemed to pulse in time with the heart of the forest. The energy was overwhelming, an intense flood of power that made you feel as if you were standing at the center of the universe, holding the weight of the past and the future in your hands. The darkness inside the tree began to shift, its swirling tendrils spiraling outward as if searching for something, and you gave it that something. You gave it light. The light that had flickered behind you, the light from the pedestal, began to shine brighter, its glow growing, expanding as it moved toward the heart of the tree. The darkness resisted, but the light bent around it, flowing like water, weaving through the swirling void, not to fight it, but to become one with it. You could feel the connection, the union between the two forces, and for the first time since you had entered the forest, the air grew still, silent, as if the world itself had paused to take in the moment. For a long while, nothing happened. The darkness inside the tree seemed to pull back as if it were retreating, but it was not gone. It had been transformed. The pulsating glow that had once been cold and oppressive now shimmered with a soft, warm light, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness. The heart of the tree was no longer a void, it was a light that blended with the shadow, a perfect harmony of creation and decay, life and death. The tree's branches swayed gently as though breathing once more. The cavern around you trembled, and the air began to shift, the oppressive weight lifting from your shoulders. The ground beneath you seemed to stabilize, as though the very earth was breathing with you, in time with the heart of the tree. The symbols on the walls of the cavern, symbols that had once been dark and cryptic, now glowed with a soft, radiant light, their meaning clear at last. You had done it. You had healed the forest's heart. The whispers, once frantic and broken, now calmed, their voices blending into a soft, harmonious hum that resonated in your chest. The forest had accepted the balance, light and dark, life and death, intertwined once more. The wounds that had festered for so long had finally begun to close. But you knew, even as you stood there, that this was only the beginning. The heart of the forest had been healed, but the forest itself would need time to recover. The world outside, the world you had left behind, would now have to face the consequences of the balance being restored. The path ahead would not be easy, but you had completed your purpose. You had restored the heart of the forest. You had brought the balance back. And now the forest would rise again. The light from the heart of the tree flickered and pulsed in the cavern, a soft, gentle rhythm that felt like the breath of the forest itself, in perfect sync with your heartbeat. You stood still, your hand still pressed against the obsidian bark, feeling the steady pulse of energy beneath your fingertips. It was warm now, not the cold, empty void it had once been. The darkness, instead of devouring, was now part of the whole, integrated into the delicate balance of the forest's soul. The cavern had transformed around you. The air no longer felt oppressive. The weight that had settled on your shoulders for so long had been lifted. The shadows on the walls had softened, and where once there had been eerie shapes, there were now vibrant patterns of light, living symbols that seemed to shimmer with life and history, weaving together the story of the forest's past, present, and future. The vibrations from the heart of the tree were no longer harsh. They were gentle, soothing, as if the earth itself were breathing a sigh of relief. But even as the tree's heart began to heal, the faint echo of something deeper still lingered in the cavern. There was more, you knew that. The whispers had quieted, but there was an urgency in the air, a silent pressure, like the earth was waiting for you to understand something that had yet to be revealed. The restoration of the balance was not the end. It was only the first step toward a greater awakening, one that would reverberate through the entire forest. You took a deep breath, your body humming with the energy of the cavern, and slowly withdrew your hand from the heart of the tree. The dark void was gone, replaced by a soft glow that now pulsed at the core of the tree, a pulse of life. As your fingers left the bark, the tree trembled, and the branches above you shifted as if responding to the change. The forest was waking up. Turning away from the tree, you moved cautiously toward the narrow tunnel that led back into the heart of the earth. The path behind you had already begun to shift. The stone walls were no longer cold and rough. They had softened, almost as though they had been touched by a living force. The markings on the walls seemed to glow brighter, and as you walked, the shadows that once clung to the stone now seemed to recede, pulled back by the light emanating from the heart of the forest. As you made your way back, a sense of calm enveloped you. The whispers, now distant but ever present, spoke of the forest's recovery, of its heart being healed and the balance restored. The journey to this moment had been long, filled with uncertainty and fear, but now you could feel the forest's energy, a palpable sense of harmony, and it filled you with a deep sense of peace. But the deeper you ventured, the more you felt the earth stir beneath your feet. It was subtle at first, just a faint tremor in the ground, but it grew stronger, more insistent, until the very air around you seemed to vibrate with the pulse of life. It was not a violent tremor, it was a heartbeat. The forest, the land, was awakening. You quickened your pace, drawn forward by the pulse that seemed to grow louder with each step. The narrow passage opened into a larger cavern, and there, at the far end of the chamber, was the entrance, a tunnel of light that stretched upward, back toward the surface. The trees above, once silent, now seemed to stir with an unseen force, their branches shifting as if they too felt the awakening. The light was not just sunlight, it was something more, something ancient, something that could only be born when the balance had been restored. As you approached the tunnel of light, the earth seemed to respond, the ground beneath you rumbling once more. It was no longer a tremor of disturbance, but one of rebirth. The walls of the cavern were now alive with light, their once dull surfaces now glowing with energy. The path ahead, once uncertain and dark, was now illuminated by a soft radiance that beckoned you forward. Stepping into the light, you felt it, the forest was awakening. The trees, the roots, the very land itself had been given a second chance. The pulse of life surged through you, and for a moment, it felt as if you were one with the forest, connected not just by the earth beneath you, but by the very energy of existence itself. The light was not just physical, it was spiritual, an essence that flowed through the veins of every living thing. As you ascended through the tunnel, the light grew brighter, the air fresher. The echoes of the cavern's heartbeat faded, replaced by the sound of the world outside, the rustling of leaves, the soft whisper of wind through branches. You stepped into the open air, and the world around you felt different. The sky above was clear, the clouds thin and wispy, as though the heavens themselves had cleared in response to the earth below. The trees, once dark and twisted, now stood tall and proud, their branches stretching toward the sky as though embracing the light that had returned to them. The forest was no longer a place of decay, it was a place of renewal. The ground beneath your feet was rich with life, the once silent paths now alive with the buzz of creatures, the flutter of wings, the rustle of leaves. The air was thick with the scent of earth and rain, fresh and clean. The balance had been restored, not just in the heart of the tree but in the entire land. As you stood there, breathing in the revitalized world, you knew that this moment was only the beginning. The forest would need time to fully recover, to regrow what had been lost, but the foundation had been laid. The heart had been healed, and now the rest of the land would follow. The cycles of life and death, creation and destruction, would continue, but now they would coexist in harmony as they were always meant to. The whispers, once so distant, now seemed to echo from every tree, every leaf, every blade of grass. They were no longer filled with fear or urgency. Now they were filled with gratitude, a deep, reverent appreciation for the healing that had taken place. The balance is restored, one voice whispered, its tone filled with peace. The forest will grow again. The light will return to the shadows, and the shadows will return to the light. Together they are one. You closed your eyes for a moment, letting the gentle breeze wash over you, feeling the pulse of life around you. You had restored the forest, but you had also restored a part of yourself. A connection to something far older, far wiser than you could have ever imagined. The forest was no longer just a place. It was a living, breathing entity, a force of nature that had always been part of you. You had become its guardian, not just in name, but in spirit. And the forest, in return, had accepted you, not as its savior, but as its partner in the eternal cycle of life and death, light and dark. And so, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor, you knew that your journey had come to an end, but the journey of the forest had only just begun. The air around you felt lighter now, almost electric with the resurgence of life. As the sun dipped lower, casting its warm golden hues across the landscape, the forest seemed to breathe, slow and deep, like it was waking from a long, heavy slumber. The trees stood tall, their once twisted forms now stretching upward, their leaves shimmering with a newfound vibrancy. The very ground beneath your feet seemed to pulse with life, the earth alive with the hum of nature's rebirth. Every step you took felt like an offering, a tribute to the life that was now blooming all around you. As you ventured deeper into the forest, the path that had once seemed ominous now felt like a living thing, its roots reaching out to welcome you. The branches above you were no longer oppressive. They now formed a canopy of leaves that filtered the light in a gentle, dappled pattern across the forest floor. The shadows that had once seemed so full of mystery and fear now held a peaceful stillness. The forest was a place of balance, light and dark, life and death, interwoven in a way that felt whole, complete, and undisturbed. You could feel the pulse of the forest's heartbeat under your feet, the energy of the land thrumming through your bones. It was the sound of growth, of renewal, of a world coming back to life after centuries of dormancy. The whispers of the trees, once frantic and disjointed, now flowed in harmony, like a song sung by the earth itself. They no longer carried the weight of ancient sorrow or desperation. Instead, they spoke in a language of gratitude and hope. "We are whole again," one voice whispered, its tone light, almost joyful. "The forest will grow strong once more, and the darkness will no longer haunt us." The rustling of leaves above you seemed to respond, as if the trees themselves were acknowledging this truth. The forest was no longer the fractured, wounded place it had once been. It was vibrant, alive, and full of possibility. Everywhere you looked, there were signs of growth, new shoots emerging from the ground, flowers blooming in brilliant colors, vines twisting up the trunks of trees, reaching for the light. The forest was reborn. But as you moved deeper into the woods, you began to sense something else, something subtle yet unmistakable. The forest was not just healing, it was changing. The air grew warmer, and the sky above seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly light. The winds that blew through the trees carried the scent of something unfamiliar, something ancient. It was as if the forest was no longer just a reflection of the land, it was now a reflection of you. As you walked, the trees seemed to lean closer, their branches reaching out as though drawn to you. The creatures of the forest, once hidden in the shadows, now appeared, timidly at first, then more boldly. Birds flitted through the trees, their songs bright and clear. Squirrels darted playfully across the forest floor, their tails flicking with excitement. Even the insects, once silent and still, now buzzed in the warm air, filling the forest with a gentle hum. The forest had not just been healed, it had been transformed. And you, its guardian, had played a part in that transformation. The energy that had surged through the heart of the tree had connected you to the very essence of this place, to the pulse of life that ran through its roots, through its soil, through its branches. The forest was not just a place, it was a living, breathing entity, and now you were part of it. For a moment, you stopped and closed your eyes, letting the symphony of life around you wash over you. The wind caressed your skin, the rustling of leaves whispered in your ears, and the earth beneath your feet seemed to hum with energy. You could feel the forest's heart, its essence, and it felt like a deep, knowing presence, one that was as old as the earth itself, as ancient as the stars. And in that moment you understood. The forest had never been broken. It had simply forgotten. Forgotten that light and dark, life and death, were not enemies, but essential parts of the same cycle. The forest had once known this truth, but in its sorrow, it had lost its way. And now, with the balance restored, the forest had returned to itself, to its natural state of harmony. The path before you was open, clear, and inviting. The journey that had begun so long ago, with a fractured heart and a whisper of mystery, was now complete. The forest was reborn, and you, its guardian, had fulfilled your purpose. The ancient forces that had once torn it apart had been reconciled, and in their place was a new beginning. Yet, as you stood at the edge of the forest, gazing into the distance, you knew that the work was not over. The forest had been healed, but it would always require care, attention, and balance. It would need someone to protect it, to guide it, to ensure that the delicate equilibrium between life and death, light and dark, was never again disturbed. You took one last look at the forest, a place now alive with vitality, and felt a deep sense of peace settle in your chest. The forest was no longer just a world of shadows and whispers. It was a world of growth, of light, of renewal, a place where life thrived in all its forms. As you turned to leave, the trees whispered one final time, their voices soft and full of gratitude. "The forest will remember you, guardian," they said, "and it will protect you as you have protected it. You are never far from its heart." With those words, you stepped away from the forest, knowing that your journey had come full circle. The path ahead was unclear, but you had done what needed to be done. The forest was whole again, and so were you. The sky above you was vast and endless, the twilight now fully descending on the land. The golden hues of sunset had given way to the cool blues and purples of night, and the stars began to emerge, scattered across the heavens like scattered diamonds. You stood on the edge of the forest, gazing back at the great trees that stretched into the distance, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. The forest, now restored, seemed to glow with an inner light, its energy flowing through the land like a pulse that connected everything. Life had returned to it, vibrant and full of promise. Yet, as you stood there, you felt the weight of something deeper, something beyond the healing of the forest. The world around you had changed, but so had you. The forest had opened its heart to you, and in turn, you had opened your heart to it. The bond that had formed between you and the land was unbreakable, woven into the very fabric of your being. You were no longer just a guardian in name, you were now part of the forest, part of the cycle that kept it alive, thriving, and in balance. And yet, you knew that this was not the end. The forest's healing was only the beginning of something greater, a change that would ripple outward, reaching far beyond the borders of the land you had known. The balance between light and dark, life and death, would never again be so fragile. The forest had been reborn, but it would need protection, care, and respect. The world outside the forest, the villages, the people, the cities, had been unaware of the turmoil the land had faced. And now, with the forest restored, they would begin to feel the changes. But as the first stars twinkled above you, the whispers of the forest were still fresh in your mind, their voices resonating deep within your chest. "The forest remembers you, guardian," they had said, "and it will always protect you." You understood now that your journey had not been about conquering the forest or defeating some great enemy. It had been about restoring harmony, about reconnecting the land with its own truth. The forest had been waiting for someone to remember that balance, someone who could embrace both the light and the dark, the life and the death, and heal what had been broken. But the true test was yet to come. The forest had healed, but the balance needed to be maintained. The cycle of life and death, light and shadow, would continue forever. The world would change, as it always had, but the harmony that had been restored would guide its course. You had given the forest a second chance, and now it was time for you to give the world a second chance as well. You turned away from the forest, the trees fading behind you as you walked into the open expanse before you. The land was quiet now, the sounds of the forest fading into the distance, replaced by the soft rustling of the grass beneath your feet. The world felt different, richer, fuller, as though the earth itself had been reborn along with the trees. The path ahead was uncertain, but you no longer felt the weight of the unknown. You had embraced the forest's heart, and in turn, it had embraced you. The whispers, the visions, the dreams, they had all led you to this point. The forest had given you its trust, its strength, and its soul, and now you carried that within you. The journey you had started so long ago had come full circle. You had faced the darkness, you had healed the wounds, and you had restored the balance. But there was one thing left to do: to share the knowledge you had gained, to protect the balance and pass it on to those who would come after you. The world outside the forest was waiting, a world that had forgotten the ancient truths, a world that had moved too far away from the natural cycles of life. It was time for you to show them the way. As you made your way toward the distant horizon, the trees behind you seemed to stand a little taller, their branches reaching higher, their roots grounded deep in the earth. The whispers of the forest followed you, soft and constant, like a breeze at your back. "The forest is with you, guardian," they whispered. "It will always be with you." You did not look back. You had done what you came to do. The forest would remember, and the balance would endure. Now, it was time to face the world outside, to bring the lessons of the forest to those who needed it most. In the distance, a flicker of light caught your eye. The first signs of a village, or perhaps a settlement, nestled against the edge of the forest. It had been many years since you last saw human faces, since the world beyond the trees had seemed so distant. But now, as the forest's guardian, you felt a sense of purpose. You had learned to live in harmony with the land, and now it was time to help the world do the same. The villagers, the people who had once feared the forest, would now have to learn to coexist with it. The journey was not over. It was only just beginning. The path before you was long, but you were no longer afraid of the unknown. You had faced the darkness and emerged into the light. The forest had shown you the way, and now it was time to show the world. As you walked toward the village, the first steps of your new journey, you could feel the forest's pulse beneath your feet, steady and constant. You were not alone. The forest was with you, and the balance you had restored would live on forever.